They say an Omega has no voice in the Alpha King's court. I believe that, right up until the moment he rejected me in front of everyone, and I did the one thing no one expected. I refused him back. What happened next? Let's just say some decisions don't just change your life, they shatter kingdoms. Stay until the end to see how a servant became the reckoning they never saw coming. And hey, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love knowing where my viewers are. The throne room smelled like expensive wine and old power. Ara kept her eyes on the marble floor, counting the veins in the stone like she'd done 1,000 times before. 6 years of scrubbing these floors had taught her every crack, every stain that wouldn't come out no matter how hard you worked. The gold inlay near the dais had a chip in it. She'd put that there 3 winters ago when a noble kicked her bucket over and she'd slipped, cracking her knee so hard she couldn't walk right for a week. Nobody had cared then either. Bring her forward. The guard's hand clamped around her upper arm, fingers digging into bone. She stumbled, bare feet slapping against cold stone as he dragged her toward the center of the room. The court, dozens of them, maybe 100, watched with the kind of bored interest you'd give a dog that might do a trick. She'd been pulled from the servants' quarters an hour ago. No explanation, no chance to clean up. She still wore the gray shift stained with kitchen grease, her hair falling out of its braid in dark tangles. Her hands smelled like lye soap and someone else's dishes. The Alpha King sat on his throne like he'd been carved from the same stone. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair pulled back from a face that belonged on old coins, sharp, brutal, handsome in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. His eyes were pale gray, the color of winter storms, and they tracked her approach without a flicker of recognition. Why would they recognize her? She was nothing. Are of house. Well, the Chancellor's voice dripped with amusement as he consulted his ledger. No house, actually. Orphaned at 12. Omega class. Currently assigned to kitchen rotation. He snapped the book shut. Unmarked, unbonded, unremarkable. Laughter rippled through the court, soft, polite, the kind that didn't waste too much energy on a joke that wasn't that funny. Ara's throat tightened. She knew how to make herself smaller, had perfected it over 6 years. Shoulders in, head down, breathe shallow. Exist quietly enough that they forget you're human. She'll do. The king's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk. Lord Garrett needs a bride to seal his border treaty. This one has no family to complicate matters. The words took a moment to land. When they did, Ara's knees nearly gave out. Lord Garrett. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. 2 years ago, his last wife had died. Thrown from a horse, they said. The one before that had caught fever. The one before that, well, people stopped asking questions after a while. Your Majesty. Ara's voice came out rusty. She hadn't spoken above a whisper in months. You will leave for the border estates tomorrow. The king didn't even look at her. He was already scanning the room, attention moving on. The Chancellor will provide appropriate traveling clothes. Lord Garrett's representative will meet you at... That's when it happened. The bond. It hit her like a fist to the chest. Sudden, violent, undeniable. The world lurched sideways. Every nerve in her body lit up at once, screaming recognition at a level that bypassed thought entirely. Her wolf, silent for so long she'd half forgotten it existed, surged forward with a howl that echoed only in her skull. Mate. Her eyes snapped up without permission, drawn to the throne like iron to a lodestone. The king had gone absolutely still. His hand gripped the armrest hard enough that the wood groaned. Those winter storm eyes locked onto hers, wide with something that might have been shock. His chest rose and fell twice, quick and sharp. He felt it too. The court didn't notice. They were already whispering amongst themselves, bored with the proceedings. But Ara felt it, the golden thread that had just snapped into place between them, thrumming with possibility and power and a rightness that made her bones ache. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then the king's expression went cold, deliberately, brutally cold. No. His voice carried across the hall, freezing every conversation mid-sentence. I reject this bond. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. I, Kael Theron, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, reject you as my mate. I sever this bond. I deny this claim. Each word was crisp, formal, final. You are beneath the crown. You are unsuitable. You are dismissed. Someone gasped, probably one of the younger courtiers who still had romantic notions about fate and destiny. The older ones just watched with calculating eyes, already running the political mathematics. The rejection slammed into Ara like a physical blow. The bond, barely formed, tore with a sensation like claws raking down her insides. Her wolf screamed. Her chest burned. For a second she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there and bleed from wounds no one else could see. The king turned his attention to his chancellor. Proceed with the arrangement. Lord Garrett will receive his bride as planned. Just like that. She'd been acknowledged and erased in the same breath. Ara stood there, shaking. Blood roared in her ears. Her nails bit into her palms, hard enough to draw blood. Every instinct screamed at her to bow, to accept, to survive the way she'd always survived, by being quiet and small and forgettable. She'd watched men like Lord Garrett operate for 6 years. Watched them smile at servants before cornering them in empty hallways. Watched them discuss women like livestock, like property, like things that made noise when you broke them but didn't really matter. She'd watched, she'd remembered, she'd stayed silent, and she was so fucking tired of being silent. No. The word fell into the stillness like a stone into still water. Every head in the room turned. The chancellor blinked. I'm sorry, did you all— No. Louder this time. Ara lifted her chin, meeting the king's eyes directly for the first time in her life. I refuse. The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those gray eyes. You refuse. I refuse to be given to Lord Garrett. I refuse to be traded like livestock. I refuse this order. Her voice gained strength with each word, dragging itself up from 6 years of buried rage. You rejected me. Fine. I'm beneath you. I'm unsuitable. I'm dismissed. She threw his words back at him. But that means I'm not yours to give away either. The chancellor made a strangled noise. Several nobles had hands on weapons, reflex probably. Nobody spoke to the king like that. Nobody. You're a servant. The king's voice was very quiet. You have no rights here, no voice, no choice. Then kill me. Ara spread her arms. Because I won't go. You'll have to drag my corpse to Lord Garrett's estate, and I promise you— Her lips pulled back from her teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile. That's not the alliance-building image you're going for. Silence. Absolute crushing silence. The king stood. He moved like water, like violence held in check. 6.5 feet of controlled power descending the dais steps. The court parted without thinking, survival instincts kicking in. He stopped 3 feet from Ara, close enough that she could see gold flecks in those gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him. You think death is the worst thing I can do to you? His voice was soft, dangerous. I think death is better than being Lord Garrett's 4th dead wife. Ara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground. And I think you know it too. That's why you looked relieved when the bond formed, for about 2 seconds before you remembered that an Omega isn't politically useful enough to keep. His jaw tightened. Direct hit. You don't know anything about— I know you're testing your court. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. 6 years of watching, listening, piecing together conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Lord Garrett's been gathering support for months. This marriage alliance, it's bait. You're seeing who jumps at the chance to tie themselves to him instead of you. The king's eyes narrowed. That's quite an accusation from a kitchen servant. Kitchen servants hear everything. Ara's hands were shaking, but she kept them at her sides. You think we're furniture. You talk like we're not even there. I know which nobles visit Lord Garrett's estate twice a month. I know which one started hoarding grain last winter. I know who's been meeting in the East Gardens after dark. She was going to die for this. She knew it. But at least she'd die on her feet. If you're going to execute me for speaking, she continued, then do it for truth instead of obedience. Because I'm done pretending I don't see what's right in front of me. The king stared at her. Really looked at her. Maybe for the first time. His expression was unreadable, carved from granite. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, startled, edged with something that might have been admiration or might have been fury. You're right. He said it loud enough for the court to hear. I was testing loyalty. Lord Garrett has been positioning himself as an alternative power center for months. He turned to face the room. And half of you, his gaze swept across the assembled nobles, just failed. The Chancellor had gone pale. Your Majesty, I can explain. Explain how you arranged a bride for a suspected traitor without consulting me first. The king's voice could have frozen blood. Explain how you thought I wouldn't notice you trying to buy favor with both sides. I was merely following established protocol for border alliances. You were following your own interests. The king's attention shifted back to Ara. While this Omega, this unremarkable servant, saw through the scheme in 30 seconds, he circled her slowly, predator assessing prey. Ara forced herself not to flinch. You have courage. He stopped in front of her again. Foolish, suicidal courage, but courage nonetheless. His head tilted. The rejection stands. I cannot afford a mate right now, regardless of what fate decided. But the bond flared, sharp, angry. Neither of them had accepted the rejection properly, hadn't completed the ritual. It hung between them, raw and bleeding and refusing to die. The king's hand moved to his chest, unconscious, before he caught himself. But, he continued, voice strained, you won't be going to Lord Garrett. Relief flooded through her so fast she swayed. Instead, his smile was sharp enough to cut. You're going to prove you're as useful as you claim. You say you watch and listen? Fine. You're now officially assigned to court. You'll continue your duties, but you'll also report directly to me. Every conspiracy, every whispered conversation, every suspicious meeting. He leaned in close. You wanted a voice? Congratulations. Let's see if you survive having one. It was a trap. Obviously a trap. He was putting a target on her back, making her visible, making her useful, making her dangerous to everyone who'd spent years ignoring her. Ara met his eyes. Understood. Good. He stepped back, addressing the room. This gathering is dismissed. Chancellor, my office. Now. His gaze flicked to Ara one last time. Someone find her quarters appropriate for a court advisor, and for God's sake, get her something decent to wear. He strode toward the side exit, guards falling in behind him. The Chancellor followed, ringing his Pharisaians. The court erupted in whispers the moment the doors closed. Ara stood alone in the center of the room, very aware that every eye was on her now. Not looking through her, at her. Calculating, assessing, wondering if she was a threat or an opportunity. A hand touched her elbow. She spun, ready to fight, but it was just a young woman in servant's gray. One of the housekeeping staff Ara had worked alongside for years. This way, the woman whispered. Quickly, before they start asking questions you don't want to answer. Ara let herself be led through a side door, down a servant's corridor she knew by heart. They climbed stairs, going up instead of down for once, until they reached a part of the palace Ara had only seen while cleaning. The quarters were small but private. A real bed. A window with actual glass. A wash basin that wasn't shared with 40 other people. Someone will bring clothes, the servant said. She hesitated at the door. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. Probably both, Ara admitted. The woman almost smiled. For what it's worth, there are a lot of us down in the kitchens who are glad you said no. Lord Garrett, she shuddered. Well, be careful. You made powerful enemies today. I made powerful enemies 6 years ago when I was born Omega. Ara sank onto the bed. At least now they know I can bite back. The servant left, closing the door softly. Alone for the first time since this morning, Ara let herself shake. Let herself feel the rejection still burning in her chest, the bond that refused to sever properly, the terror and exhilaration and absolute certainty that she'd just changed her life in ways she couldn't begin to predict. She'd expected to die today. Instead, she'd been handed a weapon, visibility, and she was going to learn how to use it. Outside her window, the sun set over the Capitol. In the throne room, the Chancellor sweated through an interrogation. In the East Wing, Lord Garrett received word that his political marriage had fallen through and began making new plans. And in the king's private study, Kael Theron stood with one hand pressed to his chest, feeling a bond that absolutely should not still exist, pulling him toward a woman he'd rejected in front of his entire court. "Sire," his guard captain ventured, "are you—" "Fine." Kyle dropped his hand. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. The bond thrummed between them like a live wire, growing stronger instead of weaker. Rejection was supposed to kill it, sever it cleanly. But this thing refused to die. Because she'd refused too. She'd stood there in her grease-stained shift and looked him in the eye and said no, like it was the easiest thing in the world. Like she had every right. Like she was his equal instead of a servant he could have executed with a word. "Pull all records on Lord Garrett's movements for the past year," Kale ordered. "Cross-reference with the servants' duty rosters. If she's right about the meetings, you're trusting her?" The captain sounded incredulous. "I'm testing her." Kyle moved to the window, looking out over his kingdom. "If she's lying, she'll be exposed within days. If she's telling the truth—" He flexed his hand, feeling the ghost of the bond pulling at his ribs. "Then I just found the most valuable spy in my court." "And if she's something else entirely?" Kale's reflection smiled in the glass, sharp and cold, and edged with something that might have been anticipation. "Then things are about to get very interesting." Yote. 3 floors below, Ara pressed her hand to the window, feeling the cool glass against her palm. The bond pulsed. Somewhere in this palace, the king felt it too. She'd refused him. He'd rejected her. Neither of them had submitted. And now they were tied together in the worst possible way. 2 people who couldn't stand to be near each other and couldn't stay apart. "What the hell did I just do?" she whispered to the empty room. The bond thrummed in response. Not an answer, just a reminder. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Ara woke to find 3 things waiting outside her door. A set of court-appropriate clothes in deep blue wool, a written summons to the king's morning briefing, and a dead rat with its throat cut. The message was clear. She dressed carefully, hiding 2 kitchen knives in the folds of her skirt. Old habits from years of walking dangerous corridors. The rat she left where it was. Let whoever put it there know she wasn't scared enough to hide the evidence. The morning briefing was held in a strategy room she'd cleaned 100 times but never entered as anything other than furniture. 15 people filled the space. Nobles, military advisors, the captain of the guard. They all looked up when she entered. The king sat at the head of the table. "You're late." "Someone left a dead animal outside my door. I had to step over it." She met his gaze evenly. "Should I have brought it?" Wasn't sure of the protocol. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The king's expression didn't change. "Noted. Sit." He gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table, the seat usually reserved for junior advisors. "We're discussing border security. Since you apparently know so much about Lord Garrett's activities, this should be educational." It was a test. Another one. Ara sat. For the next 2 hours, she listened to nobles debate troop movements and supply lines and political marriages. Most of it was theater, people talking to hear themselves talk, positioning for status rather than actually solving problems. But underneath the performance, she caught fragments. A mention of grain shortages that shouldn't exist. A defensive outpost that had been left undermanned for 3 weeks. A trade route that had been temporarily redirected through Lord Garrett's territory. When there was a lull in conversation, she spoke. "The grain shortage is manufactured." Every head turned. "Explain," the king said. "House Merrick controls the northern granaries. They've been Lord Garrett's guests 3 times in the past month. I've seen the travel logs. The shortage started 2 weeks after the first visit." She pulled the details from 6 years of overhearing logistics discussions in the kitchens. "If you check the export records, I'd bet you find grain being quietly moved to Lord Garrett's estates instead of being distributed to the border garrisons." The supply master looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Those records are confidential. I worked kitchen rotation during the annual audit last year," Ara said. "Your clerks like to gossip over lunch. They especially like to complain about suspicious numbers they're told to ignore." The king leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Lord Grayson, verify this. I want those export records by tonight." "Your Majesty, House Merrick is a key ally." "Then they won't mind proving their loyalty." Kale's tone made it clear the discussion was over. His gaze shifted back to Ara. "What else?" She'd started something she couldn't stop now. The Eastern Outpost. The one that's been undermanned. It overlooks the main road to Lord Garrett's estate. If someone wanted to move troops or supplies without being observed, that would be the perfect blind spot. The military advisor's jaw tightened. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you station scouts there and see what they find. Era kept her voice level. If I'm wrong, you've wasted a few men's time. If I'm right. She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The king's fingers drummed once against the table. Do it. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. People watched Ara now, some with curiosity, some with calculation, some with barely concealed hostility. She'd just exposed 2 potential conspiracies in front of the entire senior staff. She'd also made herself indispensable, or painted a bigger target on her back. Possibly both. When the briefing finally ended, the king dismissed everyone except Ara and his guard captain. Well? Kale asked once the door closed. How am I doing so far? Am I the kind of king who executes messengers or the kind who listens to truth? I'll let you know after I see what happens to House Merrick, Ara said. His laugh was sharp. Fair. He stood, moving to a map spread across a side table. If your information proves accurate, we have a problem. Lord Garrett has been positioning himself as a rival power center. That much I knew. But if he's actively starving my border troops and creating surveillance gaps, then he's not planning to rival you, Ara finished. He's planning to replace you. Precisely. Kale's finger traced the border territories, which means the marriage alliance wasn't just political theater. He wanted eyes and ears in this palace. Someone close to me, loyal to him. The weight of what she'd disrupted settled over her. If she'd gone to Lord Garrett's estate, she would have been a spy, willing or not, a knife aimed at the king's back. Why did you really reject the bond? The question slipped out before she could stop it. The king's hand stilled on the map. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Because the last person I cared about died when enemies used her to get to me, he finally said, voice flat. Because a mate is a weakness I can't afford. Because, he turned to face her. Because you deserve better than being a target for every person who wants to hurt me. The honesty caught her off guard. That's not your choice to make, she said quietly. No. His eyes met hers, gray and hard and haunted. But I made it anyway. The rejection stands, Ara, for both our sakes. The bond flared between them, angry and insistent and completely unwilling to cooperate with that decision. Then we have a problem, Ara said, because it's not taking. I know. He moved closer, not threateningly, but not casually either. Close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. The formal rejection requires mutual acceptance. You have to accept the severing. And if I don't, then we're stuck like this, tied together, feeling every spike of emotion, every proximity, every... He cut himself off. It will make both our lives significantly more difficult. Ara considered this. Good. His eyebrows rose. You rejected me in front of your entire court, she said. Declared me beneath you. Unsuitable. If you think I'm going to make that easy on you, you're mistaken. She smiled, all teeth. We're going to suffer through this bond together, Your Majesty. Consider it motivation to solve your Lord Garrett problem quickly. For a second, she thought she'd pushed too far. Then the king laughed, a real laugh this time, startled and genuine. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? Absolutely. Good. He turned back to the map. I can work with trouble. Trouble is useful. His finger tapped Lord Garrett's estate. Let's burn his conspiracy to the ground and see who runs. Ara moved to stand beside him, studying the territories she'd only seen from the receiving end of a mop. Where do we start? The guard captain made a strangled noise, probably at the casual we she'd just deployed. We start, Kale said, ignoring his captain's distress, by finding out exactly how deep this goes. You said servants hear everything. Time to prove it. He was using her. She knew that. But she was using him right back, using his authority, his resources, his desperate need for information he couldn't get through traditional channels. It was a transaction, mutual exploitation. But when their hands accidentally brushed over the map, the bond sang, and both of them pretended not to notice. Babatasas. Over the next week, Ara proved her worth. The grain records confirmed House Merrick had been diverting supplies. Not enough to trigger immediate alarm, but enough to weaken border defenses over time. When confronted, Lord Merrick broke within hours, implicating 4 other houses in Lord Garrett's network. The scouts stationed at the eastern outpost reported movement, supply wagons, unmarked troops, late-night meetings. Lord Garrett was building a private army, and Ara kept listening. She moved through this palace like a ghost, eating in the servants' quarters, maintaining relationships with the kitchen staff, the stable hands, the chambermaids who heard nobles pillow talk. Every piece of gossip, every suspicious meeting, every whispered conversation got filtered through her memory and delivered to the king's morning briefings. The court didn't know what to make of her. Some nobles tried intimidation, finding her in corridors, reminding her of her place. She smiled and remembered their faces, their threats, their allies. Added them to her mental list of people to watch. Some tried bribery, gold, favors, promises of protection if she'd just share what she told the king. She took notes on who offered what and reported those too. Some tried to befriend her, thinking she was naive, manipulable, desperate for acceptance. Those were almost worse than the threats. But through it all, the bond pulled. She'd be in the servants' hall and feel a spike of anger that wasn't hers, the king dealing with some frustration 3 floors away. He'd be in council meetings and feel her amusement when she overheard particularly stupid gossip. They learned to shield, to dampen, to ignore the constant awareness of each other. It didn't really work. 2 weeks after her refusal in the throne room, Ara was cornered. She'd been returning from the kitchens late, carrying intelligence about a suspicious shipment, when 3 men stepped out of a side corridor. Not guards, not servants. Well-dressed, well-armed, and wearing House Garrett's colors. "You've been causing problems," the leader said. He was older, scarred, the kind of man who'd done violence professionally for years. "Lord Garrett wants that to stop." Ara's hand moved to the knife hidden in her sleeve. "Lord Garrett can take it up with the king. The king's not here." The man smiled. "But don't worry, this won't take long. Just long enough to teach you what happens to servants who forget their place." They advanced. Ara ran. Not away, toward. She ducked under the leader's reaching arm, drove her shoulder into the second man's knee, and slashed the third across the forearm with her knife before any of them could react. 6 years of dodging aggressive drunks in tight corridors had taught her how to move. She made it 10 feet before they caught her. The leader's fist caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs. She hit the wall hard enough to see stars. Her knife clattered away across stone. "Should have run," he said, drawing a blade of his own. The bond screamed. Somewhere in the palace, the king felt her fear, her pain, her absolute certainty that she was about to die. The leader raised his knife and jerked backward as something hit him like a battering ram. The king materialized out of the darkness, moving faster than anything human had a right to move. His hand closed around the leader's throat, lifting him off the ground. The other 2 men scrambled for their weapons, but the guard captain was already there, flanked by 4 royal guards. "Explain," Kyle said quietly, "why you're attacking my advisor." The man choked, clawing at the king's wrist. "Lord Garrett ordered—" "Lord Garrett ordered you to commit treason in my palace?" Kale's voice was conversational, terrifying. "Interesting choice." He dropped the man who crumpled gasping to the floor. "Take them," he told his guards. "Find out everything they know about Lord Garrett's plans. Use whatever methods necessary." The guards dragged the 3 men away, leaving Ara slumped against the wall, clutching her ribs. Kale crouched in front of her. "How bad?" "I've had worse." It was true. 6 years as an Omega servant, you learned to take hits. "How did you know?" He tapped his chest. "Felt it. You were terrified, then furious, then—" He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away if she wanted. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her jawline where she could already feel a bruise forming. "Then you fought anyway." The bond hummed at the contact. "Can't help it," Ara said. "Apparently I'm trouble." His laugh was quiet. "Yes, you are." He stood, offering his hand. "Can you walk?" She took his hand, felt the bond flare at the skin contact, and let him pull her upright. Her ribs protested, but nothing felt broken. "I need to report," she said. "The shipment I was tracking can wait until morning." He was still holding her hand. Neither of them had let go. "You need medical attention. I need to finish my job. Ara. Her name in his voice did something complicated to her pulse. For once, let someone take care of you. It would have been easier if he'd ordered her, commands she could resist, but the quiet request, the genuine concern in those gray eyes. Fine, she said, but I'm reporting to the morning briefing. Lord Garrett's escalating. Agreed. He finally released her hand and she pretended the loss of contact didn't sting. Come on, the physician's quarters are this way. They walked through the dark corridor side by side, king and servant, Alpha and Omega, two people bound by a bond they both refused and couldn't escape. Thank you, Ara said quietly, for coming. Always. The word came out before he could stop it. He cleared his throat. Your valuable intelligence asset. Can't have you getting killed. Right, asset. She smiled despite the pain. That's definitely why you felt my fear from 3 floors away and came running. He didn't answer, but the bond hummed between them, honest even when they weren't. The physician's hands were cold and efficient as they pressed against Ara's bruised ribs. She bit down on the inside of her cheek, refusing to make a sound that might be mistaken for weakness. 2 cracked ribs, the old woman announced, her tone clinical. You're lucky they didn't break clean through. I'll bind them, but you need rest. No lifting, no sudden movements, and absolutely no. I'll be at the morning briefing, Ara said. The physician's eyes flicked to the king, who stood by the window with his arms crossed. Your Majesty, perhaps you could convince your advisor that recovery requires actual rest? I've known her 3 weeks, Kyle said without turning. Does she seem like someone who takes advice? No, Ara and the physician said simultaneously. The binding was tight enough to restrict her breathing, wrapped around her torso like armor made of linen. When the physician finally stepped back, Ara pulled her shirt down and stood, slower than she wanted, but upright. Thank you, she said. The physician gathered her supplies with a disapproving huff. The tincture is for pain, 2 drops in water no more than 3 times daily. And if those ribs don't heal properly because you insisted on being stubborn, don't come crying to me when you're 40 and can't breathe in winter. She left, muttering about foolish girls and impossible patience. Ara made it to the door before the king spoke. Stay. It wasn't quite an order, not quite a request either. She turned. He was still looking out the window, backlit by moonlight, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Lord Garrett sent men into my palace to attack you, he said. That's an act of war. It's also proof we're getting close to something. It's proof you're in danger. He finally looked at her. They weren't trying to scare you, Ara. They were trying to kill you. I know. She'd felt the intent in their eyes, the finality in that raised blade. Which means we've hurt him. People don't kill over minor inconveniences. People kill over insults to their pride. Kael moved away from the window, stopping a few feet from her. You humiliated him, refused his bride price, exposed his allies, cost him resources and reputation. He'll come for you again. Then I'll be ready. Will you? His voice sharpened. You fought 3 trained soldiers with a kitchen knife. You got lucky. Next time I'll fight 4. She met his stare. What do you want me to say? That I'm scared? I am. That I should hide? I won't. You gave me visibility, Your Majesty. You made me a player in this game. I'm not going back to being invisible just because the stakes got real. The bond hummed between them, her determination crashing against his frustration. You're infuriating, he said. You're not the first person to notice. He laughed, sharp and involuntary. No, I imagine I'm not. He scrubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking exhausted. Fine. You win. But you're getting guards, 2, minimum, and you're moving to secured quarters in the East Wing where we can actually protect you. That'll make the servants suspicious. They'll stop talking to me. Then figure out how to maintain those relationships from a position of safety. His tone left no room for argument. This isn't negotiable, Ara. You're too valuable to lose. There it was again. Valuable. Asset, tool, not person, never person. Understood, she said, keeping her voice flat. Will that be all? Something flickered across his expression. Are you angry? Why would I be angry? You're protecting your investment. She turned for the door again. I'll see you at the morning briefing. She made it 3 steps before his hand caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her. The bond ignited at the contact. Both of them froze. "I came running because I felt you terrified," he said quietly. "Not because you're an asset. Because the bond screamed that you were in danger, and I couldn't—" He stopped. Released her wrist like it burned. This would be easier if I didn't care. Ara's ribs ached. Her head throbbed. The place where he'd touched her wrist felt branded. "Yeah," she said, "it would." She left before either of them could make it worse. The interrogation of Lord Garrett's men took 3 days. Ara wasn't allowed in the room. Too much risk, they said, that seeing her would make the prisoners stop talking. But she read the reports afterward, standing in the strategy room with the morning briefing team, watching nobles shift uncomfortably as the scope of the conspiracy unfolded. Lord Garrett had been planning for over a year. The grain diversions, the blind spots in surveillance, the whisper network spreading doubt about the king's leadership, all of it coordinated. He'd bought loyalty from 6 noble houses, positioned supporters in key military posts, and cultivated relationships with border lords who felt neglected by the crown. "It's textbook," the military advisor said, pointing at the map where red markers showed compromised positions. Weaken from within, create instability, then position himself as the strong alternative when the kingdom starts falling apart. "Except we caught it," Lord Grayson said. He'd been subdued since his house's involvement in the grain scheme had been exposed, cleared of treason, but not of negligence. Thanks to— He glanced at Ara with something that might have been respect or might have been resentment. "Thanks to eyes in unexpected places. The question," Kael said, "is what we do about it. Lord Garrett's estate is fortified. He has troops, resources, and enough support among the border houses that a direct assault would split the kingdom. So we siege him out," the captain suggested, "and starve the civilians in his territory? Turn half the kingdom against us for punishing innocent people?" The king shook his head. "No. We need him to move first, to make a mistake big enough that even his allies can't defend him." Ara had been quiet through most of the meeting, still adjusting to the weight of having guards shadow her everywhere, still sore from ribs that protested every deep breath. But she'd also been thinking. "What if you gave him what he wanted?" she said. Every head turned. "Explain," Kael said. "He wanted a spy in the palace. Someone close to you feeding him information." Ara moved to the map. "What if you let him think he has one?" "You want to feed him false intelligence?" Lord Grayson said slowly. "I want to feed him intelligence that makes him act." She traced the border territories. "He's been patient because he thinks he's winning. But if he suddenly believes the king is about to move against him, mobilizing troops, arresting his allies, seizing his assets, he'll panic. He'll have to act before he's ready." The military advisor frowned. "That's risky. If he doesn't take the bait—" "He'll take it." Ara's finger stopped on Lord Garrett's estate. "His pride won't let him wait to be caged, and pride makes people stupid." Silence stretched across the room. "It could work," Kael said finally. "We'd need someone he'd believe, someone who could sell the deception. Someone he already tried to kill," Ara said. "Someone desperate enough to betray you out of fear." The king's eyes narrowed. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "I'm already a target. This just gives the target a purpose." "Because walking into Lord Garrett's web is suicide." His voice hardened. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way. Not one that works this fast." She faced him across the table, ignoring every other person in the room. "You said I was valuable. Let me be valuable." "Not like this." "Then how?" The words came out sharper than intended. "I'm an Omega with cracked ribs and kitchen training. The only weapons I have are information and the fact that nobody expects me to be dangerous. If I can use that, you'll get yourself killed." He was standing now, hands flat on the table. "And I won't allow it." The bond flared, his protective fury crashing into her determination. "You don't get to decide what I risk," Ara said quietly. "I'm your king. That's exactly what I get to decide. You rejected me, remember? That means you don't get to claim alpha rights over my choices." She held his stare. "Either I'm your advisor or I'm your subject. Pick one. But you don't get to keep me at arm's length when it's convenient and pull me close when I'm in danger." The room had gone deathly silent. Kael's jaw worked. The bond thrummed between them, pulling tight. Everyone out, he said. The advisors fled. When the door closed, leaving them alone, he moved around the table with controlled fury. Do you have any idea what Lord Garrett does to people who betray him? His voice was low, dangerous. I've seen the bodies, Ara. Women especially. He doesn't just kill. He makes examples. I know. She did. 6 years of whispered stories of servants who'd served in his household and seen things that made them flinch at shadows. But I also know he's building toward something that will kill more than just me. If we don't stop him now, then we find another way. There is no other way. Her voice cracked. You need someone expendable. Someone he'd believe turned traitor out of fear. That's me. It's always been me. You're not expendable. He was close now, close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. Don't you understand that? The bond sang. Then what am I? The question hung between them. Not your mate. You made that clear. Not really your advisor. I'm a servant playing dress-up. So what am I, Kyle? What am I to you that's worth more than ending this threat? He flinched at the use of his name. He stopped. Started again. You're someone who sees truth when everyone else sees politics. Someone who stands in throne rooms and tells kings they're wrong. Someone who fights 3 soldiers with a kitchen knife because surrender isn't in your vocabulary. His hand came up, almost touching her face, before he caught himself and dropped it. You're someone I can't afford to lose. Can't afford, Ara repeated, because I'm useful, because you matter. The words sounded torn from him. Because this kingdom is full of people who want power, and you're the only one who wants truth. Because when I felt you terrified and in pain, something in me broke that had nothing to do with strategy or politics or the bond we're both pretending doesn't exist. Ara's breath caught. The rejection stands, he continued, voice rough. It has to. A mate makes you a target for everyone who wants to hurt me. But that doesn't mean I don't. He stopped himself. It doesn't mean I want you dead. The bond pulled between them, honest and raw, and completely at odds with the distance they were trying to maintain. If I do this, Ara said quietly, I need you to trust me, not protect me. Trust me. Those aren't mutually exclusive. In this case, they are. She stepped back, putting physical distance between them, because the bond made proximity dangerous. I can sell this betrayal to Lord Garrett, but only if you let me actually do it. No safety nets, no backup plans that he might see through. I walk into his estate alone and I convince him I'm his. And when he tests that loyalty, when he hurts you to prove you're sincere, then I survive it. She said it like it was simple, like 6 years of surviving hadn't already taught her exactly how much pain a body could endure. I've survived worse. Not like this, you haven't. Maybe not. But the alternative was watching Lord Garrett chip away at the kingdom until he had enough support to move openly. Was watching more servants disappear, more women become his wives, more bodies piled up as examples. Ara had been powerless her whole life. She wasn't powerless anymore. I'm doing this, she said, with your approval or without it. But it'll work better if you help me stage it. Cale stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away, both hands dragging through his hair in frustration. You're going to get yourself killed, he said to the wall. Probably. But I'll take him down first. He laughed, broken, pained. You're insane. I'm committed. There's a difference. When he turned back, his expression had shifted into something calculating. The king instead of the man. If we do this, and that's if, we do it properly. No improvisation. No heroics. You go in with a plan and an extraction strategy. Agreed. And if at any point it goes wrong, you signal and we pull you out, even if it compromises the mission. Kyle, that's the condition. His voice left no room for negotiation. I'm trusting you to be smart. You trust me to pull you out if it goes bad. Otherwise, this conversation ends now and we find another way. Ara wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes, the barely controlled fear underneath the strategic mask, stopped her. Deal, she said. Good. He moved back to the map, and just like that, he was the Alpha King again. We'll need to stage a confrontation, something public enough that word reaches Lord Garrett through multiple channels. You'll need to seem genuinely desperate, broken. I can do broken. 6 years of practice. and will need bait, information valuable enough that he believes you're selling out. They spent the next hour planning treason, fake troop movements, false intelligence about planned arrests, documents that looked real enough to fool Lord Garrett's network but wouldn't actually compromise security. They built a web of lies designed to make one truth believable, that Ara had been pushed too far and was willing to betray the king to save herself. "When do we start?" Ara asked when the planning was done. "Tomorrow? At the public forum?" Kale's expression was grim. "I'll accuse you of incompetence. You'll defend yourself badly. We'll escalate until I have you dragged out in disgrace." "Sounds fun." "It won't be." He met her eyes. "I'm going to say things that will hurt, things I don't mean, but they have to be convincing." "I know. Do you?" He moved closer. "Because once we do this, there's no taking it back. Everyone will believe it, the court, the servants, maybe even you. Can you hold on to the truth when everyone's telling you you're nothing?" Ara thought about 6 years of being invisible. 6 years of people looking through her, talking over her, dismissing her existence. "I've been nothing before," she said. "I remember how it feels. I can pretend." He studied her face like he was memorizing it. "After this, even if we succeed, things will change. The court will see you as a traitor who got caught. You won't be able to come back from that." "I never expected to come back from any of this." She touched her ribs where the binding pulled tight. "I refused a political marriage and called out the king in front of the entire court. I was dead the moment I opened my mouth. Everything since then has been borrowed time." "That's a bleak way to live." "It's a realistic one." The bond hummed between them, carrying emotions neither would voice. "After tomorrow," Kale said quietly, "I won't be able to protect you openly. If Lord Garrett's network is watching, any sign that I care about what happens to you will break the deception." "I understand. I'm not sure you do." His hand came up again, that aborted gesture becoming familiar. "The bond will still be there. I'll still feel every spike of fear, every moment of pain, but I won't be able to act on it. I'll have to let you suffer." "Good thing we're both used to suffering silently then." He almost smiled. "You don't do anything silently." "I can learn." The moment stretched. Outside the strategy room, the palace continued its rhythms. Servants working, guards patrolling, nobles scheming. Inside, 2 people stood too close, bound by a connection they couldn't sever and couldn't acknowledge. "I meant what I said," Kael finally spoke. "You matter. Remember that when tomorrow comes and I'm calling you worthless in front of the entire court." "I'll try, Ara." He waited until she looked at him. "I mean it. You matter to me. Whatever happens next, remember that's true." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Get some rest," he said, stepping back and rebuilding the distance between them. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal." She left, her guards falling in behind her as she walked to her new quarters in the secured wing. The bond pulled with every step, stretched taut between them. Tomorrow, she'd be publicly destroyed. And the day after, she'd walk into a monster's den and smile. The public forum was held weekly, a tradition where citizens could bring grievances before the king. Usually, it was petty disputes, land arguments, requests for tax relief. Boring, bureaucratic. Today, the throne room was packed. Word had spread that something was happening. The servants' network hummed with rumors. The king's new advisor, the Omega who'd refused Lord Garrett, was being brought before the court. Some said for treason. Some said for incompetence. Some said she'd finally pushed too far. Ara stood in the center of the room, flanked by guards, who gripped her arms just tight enough to look official. She'd dressed plainly, the blue wool she'd been given replaced with something closer to servant's gray. Her hair was loose, no longer braided back in courtly fashion. She looked small, vulnerable, defeated. It was all performance. The king sat on his throne, expression carved from ice. Around him the senior advisors stood, witnesses to whatever was about to happen. "Ara of no house," the chancellor announced, his voice carrying across the chamber. "You stand accused of gross incompetence in your duties as advisor to the crown, of providing false intelligence that endangered His Majesty's troops, of overstepping your position and abusing the trust placed in you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. None of it was true, but they'd built the case carefully, using real reports she'd filed, twisting details just enough to make her look incompetent instead of insightful. "How do you answer these charges?" the Chancellor asked. Ara lifted her chin. "The intelligence I provided was accurate. If it led to complications, that's because the situation was complicated." "Complicated?" Kale's voice cut across hers like a blade. "You sent troops into an ambush based on your accurate intelligence. 3 men died. That was the lie they'd built. 3 soldiers, actually killed in an unrelated border skirmish, now blamed on her failed information." "I didn't know about the ambush," Ara said, letting her voice shake slightly. "The sources I had—" "Your sources are kitchen gossip and servant rumors." He leaned forward, eyes cold. "I gave you a chance to prove yourself useful. Instead, you've proven exactly what you are, an Omega playing at politics, making decisions she's not equipped to understand." The word Omega landed like a slap, reminded everyone exactly what she was in the hierarchy that mattered. "Your Majesty, please!" She made her voice smaller, desperate. "Please what? Please give you another chance to get my people killed?" He stood, descending the dais with controlled fury. "You were a servant. I should have left you as one. At least then your mistakes would only ruin dinner, not military operations." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the act in his eyes, the performance layered over real emotion. "You are relieved of your position," he said. "Effective immediately. You'll return to servant quarters and thank whatever fortune you have left that I'm not executing you for incompetence that costs lives." "I didn't—" She reached for him, a gesture of pleading that made her skin crawl. "I was trying to help." "You were trying to be more than you are." He stepped back, disgust dripping from every word. "And people died for your ambition. Get her out of my sight." The guards dragged her backward. She struggled, not hard, just enough to look genuine. Let them pull her through the crowd, while nobles whispered and servants avoided her eyes. "Your Majesty," she made her voice crack. "Please, I can still be useful." "You're nothing," he said, cold, final, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've always been nothing. I was a fool to forget that." The throne room doors slammed behind her. Act 1, complete. They threw her in the servants' quarters, not her old room, but a shared space with 6 other women who looked at her with suspicion and pity. Word spread fast. By nightfall, everyone knew. The Omega who'd risen above her station had fallen. Hard. Some of the servants she'd worked with for years wouldn't meet her eyes. Others whispered when she passed. A few offered quiet sympathy that felt worse than hostility. Ara took it all in. Let herself feel small again. Let the palace see her broken. On the 3rd day, a message arrived. It was slipped under the door of the servants' quarters, unsigned, written in careful script. "Lord Garrett extends his sympathies for your mistreatment. Should you wish to discuss alternative employment, his estate welcomes those unfairly cast aside by cruel masters. A carriage will wait at the East Gate tomorrow at dawn." Ara read it 3 times, her heart pounding. The bait had worked. She burned the message in a candle flame, watching the paper curl and blacken. Tomorrow she'd walk out of this palace and into a trap that she'd helped set. The bond pulled, distant but insistent. Somewhere in the royal wing, Kael felt her spike of fear and couldn't do anything about it. That night, she packed light, a spare dress, the kitchen knives she'd hidden in her belongings. Nothing that would seem like preparation, just the scattered possessions of someone running away in desperation. She didn't sleep, just lay in the dark, listening to other servants breathe, feeling her cracked ribs ache with every breath. At dawn, she walked to the East Gate. The carriage was exactly where promised, black, unmarked, pulled by horses too fine for merchant work. The driver didn't speak, just opened the door. Ara climbed in. The door shut. The carriage rolled forward. And just like that, she disappeared into Lord Garrett's territory. The interior was plush, velvet seats, curtained windows. Comfortable. A gilded cage designed to make you forget you were being transported to slaughter. The journey took 6 hours. They stopped once to change horses, but Ara wasn't allowed out, just sat in expensive comfort while her future approached with every turn of the wheels. When they finally stopped, the driver opened the door to reveal an estate that looked like it ate servants for breakfast. Stone walls, guard towers, men with weapons watching every approach, Lord Garrett's fortress pretending to be a noble house. A steward waited at the entrance, older, severe, the kind of man who'd witnessed horrors and filed them under administrative duties. "Miss Ara," he said with cold courtesy, "Lord Garrett will see you now." She followed him inside. The estate was beautiful in the way poisonous things often were, all dark wood and rich fabrics and artwork that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, eyes down, silent. They climbed stairs, walked corridors, finally stopped at a door carved with intricate patterns that might have been flowers or might have been screaming faces. "Lord Garrett doesn't appreciate deception," the steward said without looking at her. "Whatever you think you're here to do, he'll see through it. They always do." Then he knocked and opened the door. The study beyond was all shadows and firelight. Lord Garrett sat behind a desk that could double as a weapon, watching her with eyes that had perfected the art of seeing through people. "Miss Ara," his voice was smooth, cultured. "How kind of you to accept my invitation. Please sit." It wasn't a request. Ara sat. Lord Garrett was handsome in the way portraits of ancient generals were handsome. Strong features, calculating eyes, the kind of smile that never reached anywhere that mattered. He wore his power like other men wore cologne. "I hear you've had difficulties with our dear king," he said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "Such a shame. Talented individuals so often go unappreciated by those too rigid to recognize potential." He slid 1 glass across the desk toward her. Ara didn't touch it. "You're wondering if it's poisoned," Lord Garrett observed. "It's not. Poison is for enemies. You're a potential asset. Why would I damage you before determining your worth?" "I'm not an asset." She met his eyes. "I'm desperate." "Yes, I gathered that from your rather spectacular fall from grace." He sipped his own wine. "3 soldiers dead because you provided faulty intelligence. The king publicly humiliating you, cast back down to servant status after tasting power." He smiled. "That must sting." "It does. And now you're here, in my home, because—" He let the question hang. This was the moment. The performance that would determine if she lived or died in the next 5 minutes. "Because I'm tired of being stepped on," Ara said, injecting bitterness into every word. "Because I was useful until I made 1 mistake and suddenly I'm disposable. Because if that's how the king treats people who serve him loyally, then loyalty is worthless." "Interesting." Lord Garrett leaned back. "Though I notice you came alone. No proof of your claimed intelligence value. No offering of information. Just a bitter Omega hoping for employment." His eyes hardened. "I don't hire servants out of pity, Miss Ara. If you want a place here, you'll need to earn it." She'd expected this. "The king is planning to move against you within the month," she said. "He's been coordinating with border houses you don't know are compromised. The grain shortages? He knows they're manufactured. The surveillance gaps? He's already filling them. And he's building a case for treason that he plans to present to the High Council in 3 weeks." Lord Garrett's expression didn't change. Anyone could invent such claims. The 5th border house switched sides 4 days ago. Ara continued. "Lord Merrick's son was offered full pardon for his father's crimes in exchange for testimony. The king has your supply route maps, the real ones, not the ones you filed with the trade office. And he knows about the weapons shipment scheduled to arrive next Tuesday, disguised as farming equipment." Now Lord Garrett's eyes sharpened. Half of what she'd said was true. Information they deliberately planted for her to carry. The other half was fabrication designed to seem real enough to verify. "You're either remarkably well informed," Lord Garrett said slowly, "or remarkably good at lying. The question is which." "I'm well informed. I was the king's advisor for 3 weeks. I heard everything." She leaned forward. "And I remember all of it. Every meeting, every document, every whispered conversation. I have a very good memory, Lord Garrett. It's what made me valuable. Until I stopped being convenient. And now you want to sell that memory to me." "I want to survive. If that means selling what I know, yes." He studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, moving to the window that overlooked his estate. "I had 3 wives," he said conversationally. "Did you know that?" Ara's blood ran cold. "I'd heard. The first was a political arrangement. Lovely girl, terrible at following instructions." He traced a finger along the window frame. "She fell from a horse. Very tragic. The second was more promising, intelligent, obedient. But she caught fever." These things happen. The third, he turned back to face her. The third tried to betray me. Thought she could gather evidence of my activities and run to the king. She was quite clever about it. What happened to her? Lord Garrett smiled. She learned that betrayal has consequences. Would you like to know what those consequences look like? Era's hands clenched in her lap. No. Smart girl. He returned to his desk. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. If you're here in good faith, genuinely cast aside by that fool king, then we can do business. I value intelligence, loyalty, the ability to recognize where true power lies. He leaned forward. But if you're here to spy, if this is some elaborate scheme to infiltrate my organization, then you'll discover exactly how creative I can be with consequences. And unlike my dear departed third wife, there won't be enough left of you to run anywhere. The threat hung in the air between them. I understand, Ara said. Do you? His hand moved to a drawer, drew out a knife, small, sharp, wickedly curved. Because understanding and believing are different things, so let's establish belief. He set the knife onto the desk between them. Tell me something that proves you're genuine. Something the king wouldn't want me to know. Something that costs you to reveal. His smile widened. And make it convincing. Your life depends on it. Ara looked at the knife, at Lord Garrett's expectant expression, at the door behind her that she knew was now guarded. The bond pulled in her chest, Kael feeling her fear spiking, unable to help. She'd walked into the monster's den. Now she had to convince him she was willing to become a monster too. Ara stared at the knife on the desk, her mind racing through possibilities like cards being shuffled. Every truth she told would be verified. Every lie would get her killed. And Lord Garrett was watching her with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. The bond thrummed in her chest, distant but insistent. Kael feeling her terror and unable to do a damn thing about it. The king has a son, she said. Lord Garrett's eyebrows rose. That's common knowledge. The prince is not that son. Era's hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against her thighs. There's another one. Illegitimate. Born to a servant woman 12 years ago. The king pays for his education in the southern provinces under a false name. He visits twice a year, always alone, always in secret. The silence stretched like a blade being drawn. That's quite a claim, Lord Garrett said slowly. It's the truth. The boy's name is Matthias. He lives with a merchant family in Southbrook. Brown hair, gray eyes, tall for his age. She met Lord Garrett's stare. The king thinks nobody knows. But servants talk. And I listened. She was gambling everything on this. The information was real. She'd pieced it together from overheard conversations, suspicious travel records, a mention of Matthias, that had made the king's expression go soft in a way nothing else did. She'd never confirmed it, never verified it, just filed it away as potentially useful. Now she was burning it to stay alive. Lord Garrett walked to a bookshelf, pulled down a leather journal, flipped through pages covered in tight handwriting, cross-referencing, checking. Southbrook, he murmured, merchant district. Matthias? His finger stopped on a page. Well, how interesting. He snapped the journal shut and turned to face her with something that might have been approval. That information is worth keeping you alive, he said. For now. Though I'm curious why you'd reveal something so valuable so quickly. Wouldn't it be smarter to hold it back? Use it as leverage? Leverage implies I have negotiating power. Era's voice was steady despite the terror screaming through her veins. I don't. You asked for proof I'm genuine. That's proof. What you do with it is your choice. Indeed it is. Lord Garrett returned to his desk, leaving the knife where it lay. And what I choose to do is this. You'll stay here as my guest. You'll provide me with detailed intelligence about the king's operations, his advisors, his plans. In exchange, you'll have safety, comfort, and the satisfaction of watching the man who humiliated you lose everything he holds dear. That's all I want, Era lied. Good. He gestured to the door. My steward will show you to your quarters. We'll begin debriefing sessions tomorrow. And Miss Ara? His smile was all teeth. Don't try to leave. The estate is well guarded, and my people have orders to ensure my guests remain comfortable. Comfortable. Right. She stood, her legs unsteady, and followed the steward out of the study. The door closed behind her with a sound like a cell locking. The quarters they gave her were beautiful and suffocating. Silk curtains, a bed that could fit 4 people, windows that looked out over gardens designed to distract from the fact that the doors had locks on the outside. A servant girl, maybe 16, hollow-eyed and silent, brought her dinner on a silver tray. The food was elaborate, expensive, and Ara couldn't eat any of it because her stomach was trying to crawl out of her throat. She'd just sold intelligence about the king's secret son to a man who would absolutely use it as a weapon. The guilt was acid in her chest, but she was inside. Lord Garrett believed her enough to keep her alive. That was the first step. Now she just had to survive long enough to complete the actual mission. The bond pulsed. She pressed a hand to her sternum, feeling the connection stretch across miles. Cale would have felt her terror in the study, the spike of panic when Lord Garrett pulled out that knife. He'd be pacing his chambers right now, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to send troops, to pull her out, to not let her do this alone. But he couldn't. Any move toward her would confirm Lord Garrett's suspicions. She was on her own. Ara moved to the window, studying the estate grounds in the fading light. Guard rotations, patrol patterns, weak points in the wall where shadows pooled thick. 6 years of watching had taught her how to see past the obvious. A knock on the door made her spin. "Come in," she called, because refusing wasn't an option. The steward entered carrying a bundle of clothes. "Lord Garrett requires you to dress appropriately for dinner tomorrow evening. These should fit." He set the bundle on the bed and turned to leave. "Wait," Ara said. The servant who brought food earlier, she seemed frightened. "Is she all right?" The steward's expression didn't change. The staff here are well cared for, as long as they follow instructions and don't cause trouble. His eyes met hers. "I suggest you do the same." Then he was gone, the lock clicking into place. Ara waited 10 seconds before crossing to the bundle of clothes. Rich fabrics, expensive tailoring, everything cut to display rather than conceal. The kind of dresses Lord Garrett's wives probably wore before they died. She shoved them into a drawer and pulled out her own spare dress instead. Tomorrow she'd play whatever role Lord Garrett wanted. Tonight, she needed to think. She lay on the bed, too soft, too big, and stared at the ceiling, mapping the layout of the estate in her mind. The study had been on the 2nd floor, east wing, guard towers at each corner, main gate heavily fortified. Servant entrances likely less protected but still watched. If she needed to run, her best bet was through the kitchens. Servants always knew the hidden ways. The bond hummed, carrying emotions that weren't hers. Frustration, worry, something that felt like apology. "I'm okay," she thought, knowing he couldn't hear but hoping the bond would carry the intent. "I'm still okay." Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by sounds she couldn't identify, and nightmares about knives and third wives who'd tried to run. Morning arrived with another silent servant bringing breakfast. This one was older, with a scar running from her temple to her jaw and eyes that had seen too much. "Eat," the woman said quietly. "You'll need your strength." "For what?" "Debriefing starts in an hour. Lord Garrett doesn't like to be kept waiting." She set the tray down and turned to leave, then paused. "Word of advice. Don't lie to him. He always knows. And he doesn't forgive." Then she was gone, leaving Ara alone with food she still couldn't stomach and terror she couldn't afford to show. The debriefing took place in a different room, smaller, more intimate, with chairs arranged to facilitate conversation rather than interrogation. Lord Garrett was already seated when the steward escorted her in. "Miss Ara, please, sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. "We have much to discuss." What followed was 4 hours of systematic extraction. He asked questions with surgical precision, starting broad and narrowing with each answer. Who attended the king's morning briefings? What topics were discussed? Which advisors held real power versus ceremonial positions? Trade routes, military deployments, political alliances. Ara answered with careful truth mixed with calculated lies. She gave him real information, things he could verify, things that wouldn't actually compromise security. She withheld the details that mattered, disguising gaps as ignorance. "I was only there 3 weeks," she said when he pressed about troop movements. "The military discussions happened in private sessions I wasn't invited to." "But you heard things, overheard conversations." "Some, but military strategy isn't my strength. I focused on political maneuvering, noble house alliances. She leaned forward, selling the performance. That's where the real power is anyway. Wars are won in throne rooms before soldiers ever draw swords. Lord Garrett smiled. Spoken like someone who understands how the game is played. Tell me more about the noble houses. Who supports the king genuinely versus who simply fears him? She fed him a mixture of truth and fiction for another hour. By the time he finally called a break, her head was pounding and her ribs ached from sitting too stiffly. You've been very forthcoming, Lord Garrett said as a servant brought wine. I appreciate cooperation. It makes things so much more pleasant for everyone. I told you, I'm done with loyalty to people who throw me away when I'm inconvenient. Yes, though I confess, I'm curious. He swirled wine in his glass. The bond between you and the king, that must have complicated your feelings. Every muscle in Era's body locked. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, but hearing him say it out loud still felt like stepping off a cliff. How did you know about that? She asked carefully. I have eyes in the palace. They reported a rather dramatic rejection in front of the entire court. His smile was sharp. A mate bond forming and immediately severed. How unfortunate for you. It was a mistake, Ara said, keeping her voice flat. Fate's idea of a joke. The king made the smart political choice by rejecting it. And you? How did you feel about being rejected? Relieved. The lie tasted like poison. A bond to someone who sees you as disposable isn't a gift. It's a cage. Lord Garrett studied her over the rim of his glass. Yet the rejection didn't take completely, did it? These things are tricky. Both parties have to accept the severing, truly accept it, or the bond lingers. Weakened, perhaps, but present. He knew. Of course he knew. His spies had probably reported every time she and Kael had been in the same room. Every moment the bond had pulled visibly between them. It's fading, Ara said. Give it time. These things die if you starve them. Do they? Lord Garrett set his glass down. Or do they fester? Become infected? Turn into something far more dangerous than a healthy bond ever could be? The question hung in the air like a blade. I wouldn't know, Ara said. I've never had a healthy bond to compare it to. Fair point. He stood, signaling the session was over. We'll continue tomorrow. In the meantime, you're welcome to explore the grounds. With escort, of course. I'd hate for you to get lost. Translation, don't try to run. Of course, Ara said. The escort was a guard named Marcus, tall, silent, with the kind of eyes that tracked every movement. He followed her through the gardens, maintaining exactly 10 feet of distance, hand never far from the sword at his hip. Ara walked the perimeter, noting everything. Guard change at noon, weak spot in the east wall where vines had cracked the stone. Servant entrance near the kitchens with a door that didn't quite close flush. She also noted the other prisoners pretending to be guests. A woman in the west garden, too thin and too careful in her movements. A man working the stables who flinched when Marcus's shadow crossed his path. People who'd been here too long, who'd stopped hoping for escape and settled for survival. Lord Garrett collected useful people the way some men collected art. Beautiful estate, Ara said, testing Marcus's willingness to engage. Yes, miss. How long have you worked here? 6 years, miss. Do you like it? His jaw tightened. Lord Garrett is a fair employer as long as you follow the rules. And what are the rules? Don't leave. Don't lie. Don't die. He said it without inflection, like reciting a grocery list. Simple enough. They walked in silence after that. When they returned to her quarters, Ara found a new dress laid out on the bed. Deep green silk, cut to emphasize curves she'd spent 6 years hiding. A note beside it read, Dinner at 8. Lord Garrett requests your presence. She stared at the dress for a long moment, then locked herself in the bathroom and threw up. Dinner was an intimate affair. Just her and Lord Garrett in a dining room designed for 20, with servants hovering at the edges like ghosts. He dressed for the occasion, expensive clothes, styled hair, the performance of civility over the reality of captivity. You look lovely, he said when she entered in the green silk. Thank you. The words felt like glass in her throat. They ate elaborate food she couldn't taste, making small talk that danced around the fact that she was his prisoner, and they both knew it. He asked about her childhood. She gave him just enough truth to be believable. She asked about his estate. He described it like a man showing off a trophy collection. "Tell me," he said, as servants cleared the main course, "what would you have done if the king had accepted the bond? If he'd claimed you as his mate instead of rejecting you?" Ara's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "I don't know. That's not what happened." "Humor me. Hypothetically." "Hypothetically, I'd have been a political liability, target for every enemy he has, dead within a year, probably." She met his gaze. "The rejection saved my life, even if it destroyed my pride." "Pride?" Lord Garrett smiled. "Such a dangerous thing. My third wife had pride. She thought she was clever enough to betray me without consequence." He paused. "Would you like to know what happened to her?" "You already told me. She learned about consequences." "I told you the ending, but the process, that's where the real lesson lived." He leaned back in his chair. "I gave her every opportunity to confess, to admit what she'd done and beg forgiveness. Pride wouldn't let her, so I had to educate her about the cost of deception." The bond flared in Ara's chest, not her fear this time, but Kael's sudden spike of rage. He was feeling this conversation somehow, feeling her sitting across from a monster who was describing torture like dinner conversation. "She lasted 3 days before she broke," Lord Garrett continued. "By the end, she was begging to tell me everything, every secret, every plan, every person who'd helped her." His eyes locked onto Ara's. "That's when I killed her. Once she had nothing left to hide." Ara forced herself to breathe. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand something." He leaned forward. "I don't trust you yet. The information you've given me is valuable, but it could be a performance, an elaborate deception to infiltrate my organization. So I'm watching, waiting, testing. And if I pass your tests, then you'll become genuinely useful to me, perhaps even valuable enough to keep long term." His smile widened. "I'm in need of a new wife, actually. Someone intelligent, observant, someone who understands how power really works." The implication hit her like a fist. "I'm not interested in marriage," Ara said carefully. "Not yet. But people's interests change when their circumstances do." He stood, moving around the table until he was behind her chair. "You're angry at the king, humiliated, cast aside. Those feelings are useful, but eventually anger fades, and when it does, you'll need something else to anchor you." His hand rested on her shoulder, light, almost gentle, and absolutely terrifying. "I can give you power, Ara. Real power. Not the scraps the king threw you, not pretend advisory positions that disappear the moment you make a mistake. Actual authority over people who currently look through you like you're invisible." The bond was screaming, Kael feeling her revulsion, her terror, her absolute certainty that she was about to snap. "Think about it," Lord Garrett said, squeezing her shoulder once before stepping away. "You're dismissed for the evening. We'll continue our discussions tomorrow." Ara stood on legs that barely held her and walked to the door with every ounce of control she possessed. Marcus was waiting in the corridor. He escorted her back to her quarters without a word, locked the door behind her, and left her alone with the weight of what had just happened. She made it to the bathroom before her knees gave out. Lord Garrett wanted to marry her, turn her into his fourth wife, the one who lasted because she was broken enough to be useful. The bond thrummed, carrying Kael's fury and helplessness in equal measure. "I can't do this," she thought. "I can't survive this." But she had to. Because if she broke now, if she ran or fought, or did anything that exposed the deception, Lord Garrett wouldn't just kill her. He'd use what she'd told him. He'd go after the king's son, after the compromised houses, after every piece of intelligence she'd handed over to stay alive. She'd given him weapons. Now she had to figure out how to take them back. 3 days passed in a rhythm of debriefings and dinners and careful lies. Lord Garrett extracted information with patient precision. Ara fed him truth wrapped in misdirection, always giving enough to seem cooperative while withholding the details that truly mattered. But she was running out of safe intelligence to share. On the 4th day, everything changed. Ara was in the garden, Marcus 10 feet behind as always, when a commotion erupted at the main gate, shouting, the clatter of weapons. She turned to see guards rushing toward the entrance, and through the gate came a group of riders in royal colors. Her heart stopped. It was a delegation from the palace. 6 guards and a nobleman she recognized from court, Lord Thane, one of Kael's military advisors. "I bear a message for Lord Garrett," Thane announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "By order of the king." Lord Garrett emerged from the main house, expression calm despite the unexpected arrival. "Lord Thane, what an unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe this visit?" "The king requests your presence at court within the week," Thane said, handing over a sealed scroll. "There are matters of border security that require your immediate attention." "How urgent?" Lord Garrett broke the seal, scanning the contents. "And if I'm unable to attend due to pressing affairs here?" "Then the king will be forced to conclude you're avoiding royal summons, which would be unfortunate for someone in your position." It was a trap. Had to be. Kael was forcing Lord Garrett to either show his hand by refusing or come to the capital where he could be arrested. But Lord Garrett just smiled. "Please inform His Majesty that I'll be delighted to attend. I'll depart tomorrow morning." He folded the scroll. "In fact, I'll bring a guest. The king will be interested to see that Miss Ara has found more appreciative employment." Ara's blood turned to ice. Lord Thane's expression flickered. Surprise, then calculation. "Miss Ara is here?" "Indeed. She's been providing me with fascinating insights into court operations." Lord Garrett's smile was all teeth. "I'm sure the king will be pleased to see her again." He was going to parade her in front of the court, prove she'd betrayed the king, use her as a weapon to humiliate Kael while demonstrating his own power. "I'll inform His Majesty," Thane said stiffly. "He'll be eager to receive you both." The delegation left. The gate closed behind them. Lord Garrett turned to Ara, who'd stood frozen through the entire exchange. "Congratulations," he said. "You're going home. Won't that be interesting?" That night, locked in her quarters, Ara paced until her ribs screamed and her feet went numb. Lord Garrett was taking her to the capital, where Kael would see her arrive as a traitor, where the entire court would witness her betrayal, where any chance of maintaining the deception would shatter the moment their eyes met and the bond flared visible for everyone to see. This was it, the end of the plan, the moment where everything fell apart. The bond pulsed, Kael on the other end, feeling her panic, probably panicking himself. She had maybe 12 hours before they left. 12 hours to figure out how to survive what came next. A soft knock on the door made her freeze. The lock clicked. The door opened. The scarred servant woman from her first morning stepped inside and quickly closed the door behind her. "You need to listen," the woman whispered urgently. "And you need to listen fast. Who are—" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you're walking into a death trap tomorrow. Lord Garrett knows you're a spy." The world tilted. I'm not... "Save it." The woman moved closer, keeping her voice low. "He knew from the moment you arrived. The information you gave him about the king's son. He already knew that. Has known for months. He let you think you were buying your life with secrets he'd already purchased." Ara's mind reeled. "Then why keep me alive?" "Because he wants to use you, take you to the capital, parade you as proof of the king's failure, and watch you both squirm when the bond flares in public." The woman's scarred face was grim. "Then he'll kill you, slowly. Make an example that ensures no one else tries infiltrating his organization." "How do you know this?" "Because I was his second wife." The words dropped like stones. "Before I died of fever. He likes to keep trophies of the ones who tried to fight back. The scar. The hollow eyes. The way she moved like someone used to hiding pain." "I don't understand," Ara whispered. "If he knows I'm a spy, why hasn't he—" "Because the game is more fun if you think you're winning." The woman grabbed Ara's wrist. "But tomorrow changes everything. Once you're in the capital, once the king reacts to seeing you as a traitor, Lord Garrett will have all the ammunition he needs to destroy you both." "What do I do?" "Run. Tonight. There's a servant passage through the kitchens. The door doesn't lock properly. I can get you there, but after that you're on your own." Ara's mind raced. If she ran, Lord Garrett would know for certain she was a spy, would accelerate whatever plans he had, would use every piece of information she'd given him as a weapon. But if she didn't run, she was walking into execution. "Why are you helping me?" Ara asked. The woman's smile was bitter. "Because I was you once. Thought I was clever enough to beat him. And I learned too late that monsters like Lord Garrett don't lose. They just make you think you have a chance before they take everything." Her grip tightened. "Don't make my mistake. Run. Live. Warn the king before it's too late." Before Ara could answer, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The woman's eyes went wide. "Someone's coming. Decide now. Run with me or stay and die." The door handle started to turn. The bond flared in Ara's chest, Kael's sudden spike of alarm, as if he could feel her standing at a crossroads between survival and destruction. "I can't run," Ara said. "If I do, he wins. He'll use everything I gave him. If you stay, you die. Then I die." Ara pulled her wrist free. "But I die making sure he doesn't win." The woman stared at her. "You're insane." "Probably." The door opened. Marcus stood in the doorway, eyes moving between them. "Lord Garrett requests Miss Ara's presence," he said. "Now." The scarred woman slipped past him without a word, disappearing into the corridor. Marcus gestured for Ara to follow. She walked through the estate on numb legs, her mind screaming that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. But another part, the part that had refused a political marriage and stood up to a king, knew this was the only choice that mattered. Lord Garrett was waiting in his study, but he wasn't alone. 3 other men stood with him, all wearing the kind of expensive clothes that came with serious power. Border lords, probably. Part of his conspiracy. "Gentlemen," Lord Garrett said when Ara entered, "allow me to introduce Miss Ara, the king's former advisor who's been kind enough to share her expertise with us." The men studied her with calculating eyes. "She doesn't look like much," one of them said. "Neither does poison until you drink it." Lord Garrett smiled. "Miss Ara has been very forthcoming about the king's plans. Haven't you?" It was a test. Right here. Right now. "Yes," Ara said. "Then tell us, what is the king planning for the border territories?" Every eye in the room fixed on her. This was the moment. She could give them false intelligence, try to misdirect them, but they'd verify it. And when they found the lies, they'd know for certain she was playing them. Or she could give them something real, something that would hurt, something that proved she'd truly betrayed Kael. The bond thrummed, connection stretched to breaking, but still there, still binding them. Ara looked at Lord Garrett's expectant face and made her choice. "He's planning to arrest you all tomorrow night," she said, "at the Capitol. The summons is a trap. He's gathering evidence for treason charges. By the time you arrive, he'll have enough witnesses and documentation to execute every person in this room." Silence. Then one of the lords laughed. "That's absurd. The king wouldn't dare." "He would. He has." Ara turned to face him. "He's been building the case for 3 weeks. House Merrick already flipped. The 5th Border House gave testimony. He has your supply routes, your meeting schedules, your entire network mapped." She looked back at Lord Garrett. "You wanted to know if I was genuine? That's genuine. You walk into that summons, you're walking into your execution." Lord Garrett's expression was unreadable. "And why," he said softly, "would you warn us? If what you're saying is true, letting us walk into the trap would serve the king's interests." "Because I'm tired of watching powerful men play games with people's lives." The words tasted like ash. "The king, you, all of you use people and throw them away. I'm done being used. So if I'm going to burn, I'm taking the match and burning everything." She met his eyes. "You asked if I could prove I'm genuine. This is proof. Cancel the trip. Accelerate your plans. Move before he can move against you." The bond screamed. Somewhere miles away, Kael was feeling her say these words, feeling her throw away the plan they'd built together, feeling her choose destruction over capture. Lord Garrett smiled slowly. "Well, that's certainly decisive." He turned to the other lords. "Gentlemen, it seems we have some planning to do. Miss Ara, thank you for your honesty. Marcus will escort you back to your quarters." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What you suggested. Accelerate." His eyes glinted. "If the king wants war, we'll give him war. Before he's ready for it." Ara had just changed everything. She'd abandoned the careful plan, the patient infiltration, the slow extraction of information. Instead, she'd thrown a torch into kindling and prayed she could control the fire. Marcus grabbed her arm, harder than necessary, and dragged her out of the study. The last thing she saw was Lord Garrett and his conspirators bent over maps, already planning their assault. Back in her quarters, door locked, Ara pressed both hands to her chest where the bond thrummed like a second heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I'm so sorry." But sorry didn't change what she'd just done. She'd warned Lord Garrett, given him time to prepare, pushed the timeline into chaos. And tomorrow, when he didn't show up at the capital for his arrest, when his forces moved instead toward open rebellion, Kyle would know that she'd chosen to betray him for real. The bond pulsed, his confusion, his hurt, his anger all bleeding through the connection. She'd gambled everything on a single desperate play. Now she just had to survive long enough to see if it worked. Outside her window, Lord Garrett's estate erupted into activity. Messengers being sent, troops being mobilized, war preparations being accelerated. And in her chest, the bond burned, connection to a king she might have just destroyed, tying her to the man she'd sworn to save even as she became his worst enemy. The game had changed, and Ara had no idea if she'd just won or lost everything. The bond burned all night. Ara felt Kale's rage like fire in her veins. His fury at what she'd done, his betrayal at words she'd spoken, his absolute certainty that she'd chosen Lord Garrett's side. The connection between them thrummed with hurt so raw it made her teeth ache. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and let him feel her determination, her refusal to apologize, her absolute conviction that this was the right move even if it looked like the worst one. He didn't understand yet, but he would. Dawn broke over Lord Garrett's estate with the frantic energy of an army mobilizing for war. Through her window, Ara watched troops assembling in the courtyard, supply wagons being loaded, messengers riding out in every direction. Lord Garrett had taken her warning and run with it, accelerating his timeline, preparing to strike before the king could move against him. Exactly as she'd hoped. The door unlocked. Marcus entered without knocking, his expression harder than usual. "Lord Garrett wants you in the strategy room," he said. "Now." She followed him through corridors buzzing with activity. Servants rushed past carrying weapons, documents, sealed orders. The estate had transformed overnight from fortress to forward operating base. The strategy room was packed. Lord Garrett stood at the head of a massive table covered in maps, surrounded by the same border lords from last night, plus a dozen military commanders. They all looked up when she entered. "Miss Ara?" Lord Garrett's smile was sharp. "Thank you for joining us. Your warning last night proved remarkably accurate. We've received confirmation that the king has been gathering evidence against several houses in this room." He gestured to the maps. "So we're adjusting our plans accordingly." "What are you going to do?" Ara asked. "Strike first. Hard. Fast." He traced a line across the map. "We'll hit the capital's supply routes here and here, cut off reinforcements. Then we move on the palace itself before the king can fortify his position." One of the military commanders frowned. "That's aggressive. We'd be committing to open rebellion." "We're already committed," Lord Garrett said. "The king was planning our arrests. We're simply defending ourselves preemptively." His eyes found Ara. "Thanks to our friend here, we have the advantage of timing." The border lords murmured agreement. They were in too deep to back out now, committed to treason whether they liked it or not. "I want you with the main force," Lord Garrett told Ara. "When we take the palace, I want the king to see exactly who gave us the intelligence that destroyed him." The bond flared, Kale feeling her standing in this room, hearing these plans and believing she was part of them. "Of course," Ara said. "Excellent." Lord Garrett turned back to his commanders. "We move at nightfall. I want forward scouts in position by—" A commotion outside interrupted him, shouting, the clash of steel. Everyone's hand went to their weapons. The door burst open. A guard stumbled in, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "We're under attack," he gasped. "The south wall. They came from nowhere. Royal forces." The room erupted into chaos. Lord Garrett's expression went ice cold. "How many?" 200, maybe more. They're already through the outer defenses." "Impossible." Lord Garrett rounded on Ara. "You said the king was planning arrests at the capital. You said we had time." "I said that's what the summons was for," Ara corrected, her heart hammering. "I never said he didn't have backup plans." She hadn't known about this attack. It wasn't part of the plan she and Kyle had built, which meant he'd adapted, heard her warning to Lord Garrett through the bond somehow, and moved faster than anyone expected. Or he'd planned this all along and never told her. "We need to hold the main house," one of the commanders barked. Fall back to defensive positions. Tres. No. Lord Garrett's voice cut through the panic. We fight. Every man, every weapon. If we lose this estate, we lose our base of operations. His eyes fixed on Ara with sudden suspicion. How convenient that you warned us just in time for the king to launch an assault. I didn't know. Didn't you? He moved toward her, and Marcus's hand clamped onto her arm, holding her in place. Perhaps this was the plan all along. Earn my trust, feed me just enough truth to seem genuine, then lead me into a trap. If I'd wanted to trap you, I wouldn't have warned you about the arrests, Ara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'd have let you walk into the capital and die. Unless the real trap was making me commit to rebellion while royal forces were already en route. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. Tell me the truth, Miss Ara. Whose side are you really on? The Bond screamed. Somewhere in the chaos outside, Kyle was close enough that the connection pulled like a physical tether. I'm on my own side, Ara said. I told you that from the beginning. Another explosion rocked the estate. Closer this time. Lord Garrett studied her for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then he turned to Marcus. Lock her in the cellars. If we survive this, I'll deal with her personally. If we don't, he smiled coldly, then she burns with the rest of us. Marcus dragged her out of the strategy room as commanders shouted orders and troops rushed to defensive positions. The estate had become a war zone. The crash of battering rams against gates, the whistle of arrows, the screams of men dying on both sides. The cellars were underground, accessed through a narrow staircase that smelled like damp stone and old blood. Marcus shoved her into a cell, bare stone walls, iron bars, a single torch for light, and locked the door behind her. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you were lying to him. Hope you're actually on the king's side. His expression was grim. Because if Lord Garrett wins this fight, what he'll do to you will make his third wife's death look merciful. Then he was gone, boots echoing up the stairs, leaving Ara alone in the dark with the sound of battle filtering through stone. She tested the bars. Solid iron, no give. The lock was high quality, probably pick-proof even if she had tools. The cell was maybe 8 feet square, with no windows and no obvious weakness. She was trapped. Above her, the battle raged. The Bond pulled insistently toward the south wall where Kyle was fighting. She could feel his adrenaline, his focus, his absolute determination to tear through Lord Garrett's forces and reach the main house. He was coming for her, or coming for Lord Garrett, and she was just collateral. Either way, she needed to not be in this cell when things got worse. Ara examined every inch of stone, looking for the weakness that always existed if you knew where to look. 6 years of cleaning had taught her that buildings were never as solid as they seemed. There were always cracks, always gaps, always there. In the corner where wall met floor, the mortar had crumbled away, probably from water damage, maybe from age. She could see maybe an inch of gap between stones. She pulled off her shoe and started chipping at the mortar with the heel. It was slow work. The stone was hard, the mortar stubborn. Her hands cramped. Her ribs protested every movement, but she kept working, flaking away pieces of ancient binding while overhead the sounds of battle grew louder. An explosion shook the entire building. Dust rained from the ceiling. The torch flickered but held. Ara worked faster, ignoring the pain in her hands, the way her fingers were starting to bleed from scraping against rough stone. The gap widened, 2 inches, 3, enough that she could get her fingers behind the stone and pull. The block shifted. She braced her feet against the wall and pulled harder. The stone ground against its neighbors with a sound like bones breaking, then suddenly came free, sending Ara sprawling backward. The gap behind was maybe a foot wide, some kind of old drainage system, probably, narrow enough that a normal person would struggle to fit. But Ara had been an Omega servant living on kitchen scraps for 6 years. She was small, flexible, and desperate. She squeezed into the gap. The passage beyond was pitch black and claustrophobic, barely wider than her shoulders. She crawled forward on her belly, feeling her way along damp stone, trying not to think about getting stuck or running out of air or what would happen if the tunnel collapsed. The Bond pulled. Kyle was moving through the estate now. She could feel his progress like a map in her head. Getting closer. Fighting through Lord Garrett's forces with the efficiency of someone who'd trained for this his whole life. The tunnel branched. Ara chose right because the Bond pulled that direction. kept crawling. Her hands were shredded, her dress torn, her ribs screaming. But she was moving, and moving meant not trapped, and not trapped meant she could still affect what happened next. Light ahead. Faint, but real. She crawled faster, ignoring the way rough stones scraped her arms, until she reached a grate set into the tunnel wall. Through it, she could see a corridor, part of the estate's main level, currently empty because everyone was fighting or fleeing. The grate was old, rusted. She kicked it once, twice, and it fell away with a clang that echoed down the empty hall. Ara pulled herself through and stood on shaking legs in the corridor. The sounds of battle were clear now, close, immediate, deadly. She could hear the clash of swords, the shouted orders, the screams of wounded men. The bond pulled toward the main hall. Kyle was there, cutting through Lord Garrett's forces like a storm made flesh. Ara ran toward it. She burst into the main hall just as Kyle drove his sword through the last of Lord Garrett's personal guard. Bodies littered the floor. The beautiful artwork was slashed, the expensive furniture broken. The space looked like a butcher's floor. Kale stood in the center of it, breathing hard, blood on his clothes and face. His eyes found her across the hall, and something in his expression cracked. Ara... She didn't let him finish. Where's Lord Garrett? The study. Barricaded himself. He moved toward her. You're bleeding. What happened? No time. She grabbed his arm, feeling the bond flare at the contact. We need to end this now before he has a chance to... An explosion tore through the east wing. They both staggered. Kyle's hand caught her waist, steadying her as the building shook. He's destroying evidence, Ara said. The documents, the supply records, everything we'd need to prove the conspiracy. I don't care about documents. Kale's grip tightened. I came here for you. The bond sang between them. You came here to stop a rebellion, Ara corrected. I'm just a bonus. You're not... He stopped himself. We need to move. This building's not stable. They ran toward the study, Kyle's guards falling in behind them. The door was indeed barricaded, heavy furniture piled against it from inside. Lord Garrett! Kyle's voice carried through the wood. Stand down. Your forces are defeated. Surrender and you'll face trial. Keep fighting and you'll die here. Silence from inside. Then, the Omega Horror is with you. How touching. Ara felt Kyle tense beside her. She played you, Lord Garrett continued. Played us both, actually. I'll admit, I'm impressed. Didn't think she had it in her. Open the door, Kyle said. No, I don't think I will. See, I've been documenting everything, every conversation with your little spy, every piece of intelligence she sold me, every time she warned me about your plans. He laughed. Even if you arrest me, the damage is done. The kingdom will know their king's mate betrayed him, that she chose me over you. The bond flared with Kyle's fury. She chose to destroy you, Ara called out. Everything I told you was designed to make you move too fast, to panic, to commit to rebellion before you were ready. Is that what you're telling yourself? Lord Garrett's voice was mocking. That you were in control? You weren't. I knew you were a spy from the moment you arrived. I've been feeding you exactly what I wanted the king to know. Then why are you barricaded in your study while your estate burns? Ara shot back. If you were so in control, why are you trapped? Silence. Then another explosion, this one from inside the study. Fire bloomed in the windows. He's destroying everything, one of the guards said. The whole room. Break down the door, Kale ordered. His guards hit it with a battering ram, once, twice, 3 times before the furniture gave way and the door crashed open. The study was an inferno. Flames consumed documents, maps, ledgers, everything. And in the center of it stood Lord Garrett, holding a torch and smiling like a man who'd already won. Too late, he said. Without the evidence, you can't prove conspiracy, can't prove treason, can't prove anything except that you attacked a noble's estate and killed his men. His smile widened. I'll spin this as self-defense, the aggressive king overreaching his authority. By the time I'm done, you'll be the villain in this story. The survivors will testify, Kale said. The survivors are loyal to me. They'll say whatever I tell them to say. Lord Garrett dropped the torch. Flames spread across the floor toward them. You've lost, Your Majesty. Even in defeat, I win, because the seed of doubt is planted. Your people will wonder if you can be trusted, if you're too violent, too unstable. His eyes found Ara, and they'll know your mate chose me over you. That's the story that will spread. The king whose own mate didn't want him. The bond thrummed. Kael's hand moved to his sword. Don't, Ara said quietly. That's what he wants, for you to kill him in rage and prove his point. He's destroying evidence of a conspiracy that could have torn the kingdom apart. The evidence doesn't matter. Ara stepped forward, closer to the flames, closer to Lord Garrett's mocking smile. Because you already lost. You just don't know it yet. Lord Garrett's smile faltered slightly. Brave words from a woman standing in a burning building. You said you knew I was a spy from the beginning, Ara said, that you were feeding me information. But that's not true, is it? Because if it was, you wouldn't have accelerated your timeline when I warned you about the king's trap. You wouldn't have mobilized your forces and committed to open rebellion. You would have sat back and watched me play my game. She moved closer, ignoring the heat. The truth is, you believed me. You believed I'd betrayed the king. You believed the information I fed you, and that belief made you sloppy. She gestured to the burning room. This panic? Destroying evidence because you know it proves your guilt? This isn't the behavior of someone in control. This is desperation. Lord Garrett's expression darkened. And here's the thing about evidence, Ara continued. I didn't need to steal documents or maps. I didn't need physical proof. Because I'm the proof. She tapped her temple. 6 years of listening taught me to remember everything. Every conversation you had in front of servants. Every order you gave. Every time you threatened someone or made them disappear. I know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively, and I can testify to all of it. No one will believe an Omega servant over a noble lord. They will, when I name the other witnesses. The servants who heard the same things, the guards you thought were loyal but are actually terrified, the merchants you paid to move weapons under false manifests. Ara smiled. You were so busy watching for spies from the palace that you forgot about the people you treated as furniture. We were there for everything, Lord Garrett, and we remember. His face went pale. The king doesn't need documents, Ara said. He has me. He has testimony from survivors who'll turn on you to save themselves. He has the assault on this estate as proof you were preparing for rebellion. She stepped back toward Kael. You're right that you planted doubt about the king, but you also gave us everything we need to destroy you and everyone who supported you. The flames were spreading. The ceiling groaned. We need to go, Kael said. Now. What about him? One of the guards asked, gesturing to Lord Garrett. Leave him, Ara said. Let him burn with his evidence. Lord Garrett's eyes went wide. You can't. You need me for trial. We have testimony, Kael said coldly. We don't need you. They turned and walked out, leaving Lord Garrett screaming behind them. His guards dragged him from the study as the ceiling began to collapse, but Ara didn't look back. They made it out of the main house just as the entire east wing collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning debris. Kael's forces had secured the courtyard. Lord Garrett's surviving troops were being rounded up, disarmed, taken into custody. It was over. Lord Garrett's rebellion had lasted less than a day. Ara stood in the courtyard, covered in blood and dust and ash, watching the estate burn. The bond thrummed in her chest, Kael beside her, alive, victorious, and absolutely furious. You warned him, he said quietly. I felt it through the bond. You told him about the trap. I did. You made him accelerate his timeline, commit to rebellion before he was ready. Yes. You could have been killed if he'd figured out what you were doing, but he didn't. Ara turned to face him, because men like Lord Garrett are so convinced that they're the smartest person in any room that they can't imagine a servant might outmaneuver them. Kael's jaw worked. This wasn't the plan. The plan was too slow, too cautious. He would have seen through it eventually. She met his eyes. I had to make him believe I'd truly betrayed you, and the only way to sell that was to actually warn him, to give him real intelligence that hurt us, to make you hate me through the bond so he'd feel it and believe it. I didn't hate you, Kael said roughly. I was terrified you'd gotten yourself killed playing games with a man who murdered 3 wives. The bond pulsed between them. His fear, her determination, the connection that had held even when both of them tried to break it. I survived, Ara said, and we won. At what cost? He gestured to the burning estate. You gave him intelligence about my son, about compromised houses, about... I gave him intelligence he already had, Ara interrupted. The information about Matthias? He knew, had known for months. I was just confirming what his spies had already told him. She pulled a folded paper from inside her dress, torn and bloody, but readable. And every secret I sold him, I documented. Names, dates, exactly what I revealed. It's all here. Cale took the paper, scanning it with growing comprehension. You weren't improvising, he said slowly. You had this planned. Not all of it. The second wife helping me, that was unexpected. But the warning, the acceleration, making him commit to rebellion before he was ready? She nodded. That was always the play. Make him so convinced I'd betrayed you that he'd move too fast and destroy himself. By actually betraying me. By making it look like I betrayed you. She touched his arm, feeling the bond flare. Everything I gave him was either false intelligence wrapped in truth, or true intelligence that we wanted him to have. The only real damage was making you believe I'd turned. Kael stared at her. You felt me hate you through the bond. You felt that and kept going anyway. Because it was the only way to sell it. Her voice cracked slightly. Because if I'd faltered, if the bond had shown any doubt, he would have killed me and we would have lost everything. The king, the alpha, the man who'd rejected her in front of his entire court, pulled her against his chest so suddenly she didn't have time to resist. The bond exploded at the contact, flooding them both with emotions too complicated to name. You're insane, he said into her hair. Absolutely insane. So I've been told. And brilliant, and terrifying, and... He pulled back enough to look at her face. And I felt every second of you in that estate. Every spike of fear, every moment of pain, every time he threatened you. I felt it, and couldn't do anything except trust that you knew what you were doing. I knew, Ara said, mostly. He laughed, rough and pained and genuine. Mostly, that's not reassuring. It worked, though. It worked. He kept his hands on her shoulders, like he needed the physical confirmation that she was real. You destroyed a conspiracy, exposed a traitor, and turned his own arrogance into the weapon that killed him. All while making everyone, including me, believe you'd switched sides. It was a team effort, Ara said. You did storm the estate, only because I felt through the bond that you were in immediate danger. That wasn't strategy, that was panic. His grip tightened. I thought I was going to lose you. You rejected me, remember? I'm not yours to lose. The rejection didn't take. His voice dropped. You know it didn't. The bond's still there, stronger now than when it formed. It was true. The connection between them had survived rejection, distance, deception, and doubt, had grown fiercer instead of fading. What do we do about that? Ara asked quietly. I don't know. He touched her face, the gesture he'd aborted a dozen times finally completed. But I know I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it, tired of pushing you away for political convenience, tired of... Your Majesty. The captain of the guard approached, interrupting. Lord Garrett and his surviving forces are secured. What are your orders? Cale stepped back, sliding into king mode like putting on armor. Take them to the capital. They'll stand trial for treason, conspiracy, and attempted rebellion. I want full testimony from every soldier, every servant, every person who witnessed Lord Garrett's activities. His eyes found Era. And I want it documented that Miss Era's testimony was instrumental in exposing the conspiracy. The captain nodded and retreated. Around them, soldiers worked to contain the fires and secure the estate. Survivors were being sorted, some to be arrested, some to be questioned, some to be released. The machinery of justice grinding into motion. What happens now? Ara asked. Now we go home. We present evidence to the High Council. We make sure every noble who supported Lord Garrett faces consequences. Cale looked at the burning estate. We rebuild trust in the crown and prove that treason has costs. I meant what happens to us. He turned back to her. What do you want to happen? It was the first time he'd asked instead of decided. I want to not be invisible anymore, Ara said. I want to matter. Not as a mate bond, not as a political asset, but as myself. You already matter, Kael said. You exposed corruption I couldn't see. You outmaneuvered a man with 30 years of political experience. You walked into a trap alone and turned it into a weapon. He smiled slightly. Trust me, you are the opposite of invisible. The bond hummed between them, carrying something that felt like possibility. The rejection stands, he said. It has to, for your safety and mine, but he held out his hand. I'd like you back as my advisor. Real advisor this time. Not a cover for spying. Actual voice in how this kingdom runs. Ara looked at his offered hand, at the man who'd called her beneath him and then trusted her with his kingdom's survival, at the king who felt her fear through a bond they both denied and came running anyway. She took his hand. Deal, she said, but I want actual authority, real decisions, not just listening, acting. Done. And quarters that don't have guards outside the door. Reasonable. And you have to stop pretending the bond doesn't exist when it's convenient. He pulled her closer. What if I stopped pretending entirely? Then we'd have a problem. Because I'm not interested in being claimed by someone who rejected me in front of his entire court. What if I'm interested in earning back what I rejected? The bond flared. Ara's breath caught. That would take time, she said. I have time. And effort. I excel at effort. And you'd have to actually treat me as an equal, not a mate bond you're reluctantly accepting, not an omega you're humoring, an actual equal. Done, Kael said immediately. Anything else? Ara smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in weeks. Yeah, you have to let me testify at Lord Garrett's trial. I want to watch his face when a servant destroys him in public. Absolutely. He pulled her against him again, and this time she didn't resist. You earned that right about 3 times over. They stood there in the courtyard while the estate burned behind them and soldiers cleaned up the remains of a failed rebellion. 2 people bound by a connection they couldn't break and weren't sure they wanted to anymore. We're going to be complicated, Ara said. Probably. People are going to talk. Let them. The court's going to lose their minds when they find out I was playing spy the whole time. Good. They could use the disruption. She laughed against his chest, feeling the bond sing with something that wasn't quite joy but was close enough to matter. They'd won. Not cleanly, not easily, not without cost. But they'd won. And for the first time since this whole mess started, Ara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth more than survival. She'd found her voice. And she was never going silent again. The journey back to the capital took 3 days, and Ara spent most of it sleeping in a supply wagon because her body had finally figured out it was allowed to stop running. Her ribs ached, her hands were bandaged from crawling through stone tunnels. Every muscle screamed protest at the slightest movement. But she was alive. Lord Garrett rode in chains at the center of the convoy, flanked by guards who looked ready to run him through if he so much as breathed wrong. The surviving conspirators rode behind him, border lords who'd gambled on treason and lost. They didn't look at Ara when the wagons passed, didn't acknowledge the servant girl who'd destroyed their carefully built network. That was fine. She'd make them acknowledge her soon enough. Kael rode at the front of the column, conferring with his commanders about testimony and evidence and how to present the case to the High Council. He glanced back at her wagon periodically, checking through the bond more than his eyes, and each time she felt the connection hum with relief that she was still there. The rejection hadn't taken. They both knew it now. The bond had survived everything they'd thrown at it and come back fiercer, more insistent, absolutely refusing to die gracefully. They hadn't talked about what that meant yet. On the second night, camped in a clearing halfway to the capital, Kael found her sitting away from the main fires. She'd been watching the stars and trying not to think about Lord Garrett's third wife, the woman who'd tried to fight and been broken for it. You should be resting, he said, settling onto the log beside her. I've been resting for 2 days. Any more rest and I'll forget how to walk. Your hands are still healing. They're fine. She held them up, wrapped in clean bandages now, properly tended by the king's physician. I've had worse. That made him flinch. You shouldn't have had any of this. Maybe not. But I did, and I survived, and now Lord Garrett gets to face consequences. She lowered her hands. I'll take that trade. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the camp settle for the night. Guards changing shifts, horses being tended, the quiet sounds of an army at rest. The trial starts in 4 days, Kael said. The High Council wants testimony from everyone involved. You'll be called as a primary witness. Good. It won't be pleasant. They'll ask detailed questions, make you relive everything. He looked at her. And Lord Garrett's council will try to discredit you. They'll bring up your status, your background, the fact that you're an Omega with no house and no formal education. They'll suggest you're lying for attention or favor, or, I know what they'll say. Ara had been preparing for this since she'd walked into Lord Garrett's estate. Let them. I've been underestimated my whole life. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be used to it. No, but I am. She turned to face him. And I'm going to use that. They'll come at me expecting a frightened servant who can be bullied into changing her story. Instead, they're going to get every detail, every name, every conversation I witnessed over 6 years of being invisible. They're going to get the truth, and it's going to bury Lord Garrett and everyone who supported him. The Bond thrummed with his pride in her. You're terrifying, he said. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. It's not. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took one of her bandaged hands. It's one of the things He stopped, started again. It's one of the reasons the bond formed. Fate doesn't pick randomly. There's always a reason. Fate picked wrong this time. You're an Alpha King. I'm a servant. You're my equal. He said it with absolute certainty. Power, status, bloodline, none of that matters compared to who you actually are. And you're stronger than half my nobles, smarter than most of my advisors, and braver than anyone I've ever met. His thumb brushed over her bandages. The bond didn't pick wrong. I was just too stupid to see it at first. Ara's throat tightened. You rejected me in front of your entire court. I know. Called me beneath you, unsuitable, dismissed. I know. His voice was rough. And I can't take that back. Can't undo the damage. But I can spend however long it takes proving I was wrong. The bond pulled between them, want and fear and possibility all tangled together. I'm not interested in being claimed because the bond says we should be together, Ara said quietly. If that's all this is, biological imperative and fate's idea of a joke, then I'd rather let it die. It's not all this is. Kale shifted closer. The bond formed before I knew you, before I understood what you were capable of. If I could go back and accept it in that moment, I would. But I can't, so instead, he took a breath. Instead, I'm asking you to let me earn it. Let me prove that I want you for who you are, not what fate decided. That could take a long time. I have time. And you might fail. Then I fail, but at least I tried. He smiled slightly. You don't strike me as someone who accepts half measures. Why would I offer you anything less? Ara studied his face in the firelight. The sharp features, the gray eyes that had looked at her with contempt once and now held something far more complicated. The man who'd saved her from Lord Garrett's thugs and then trusted her to walk into hell alone. Okay, she said. His eyebrows rose. Okay, you can try, but I'm not making it easy on you. I'd be disappointed if you did. She laughed. Actual, genuine laughter that felt foreign after weeks of fear and pretending. You're insane. So I've been told. He kept holding her hand as they sat there, and the bond hummed contentedly between them, like it had been waiting for this acknowledgement the whole time. The capital came into view on the afternoon of the third day, stone walls and towers rising against gray sky. Word of their approach had spread. Citizens lined the streets as the convoy entered, watching with the kind of hungry curiosity that came with scandal. The king had defeated a rebellion, captured a traitor, exposed corruption within the noble houses, and brought back the Omega girl who'd been publicly humiliated and disappeared. Ara felt their stares like physical weight, heard the whispers. Is that her, the one who refused Lord Garrett? I heard she was dead. I heard she turned traitor. I heard she seduced the king. She kept her head up and her expression blank. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. In 4 days, they'd have their answers. The convoy split at the palace gates. Most of the troops peeled off toward barracks. The prisoners were taken directly to the palace dungeons under heavy guard. Kyle and his senior staff headed for the throne room where the High Council was already assembled. Ara rode in the wagon all the way to the palace steps. then climbed down on stiff legs and looked up at the building she'd scrubbed floors in for 6 years. A servant she recognized, one of the kitchen staff, stood at the entrance. The woman's eyes went wide when she saw Ara. "You're alive," she breathed. "Apparently." Ara managed a smile. "Surprise. We thought, when you left with Lord Garrett's people, when word came back that you'd turned traitor." The woman shook her head. "Everyone's been talking, saying terrible things. I know, it's fine. It's not fine. They're calling you—" She stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "What are they calling me?" The woman's voice dropped. "Traitor, whore, Omega who forgot her place. She looked miserable. "I didn't believe it. None of us in the kitchens did. We knew you wouldn't—" "Thank you," Ara said quietly. "That means more than you know." A steward appeared, not the one from Lord Garrett's estate, one of the palace staff. "Miss Ara, the king has arranged quarters for you in the East Wing, if you'll follow me." The kitchen servant stepped back, but she caught Ara's arm first. "Whatever they say about you, we know the truth. You're one of us. Always will be." Ara nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed the steward inside. The quarters were the same ones she'd had before, small but private, with the window overlooking the gardens. Someone had cleaned them, put fresh linens on the bed, left a tray of food on the table. She stood in the center of the room and felt the weight of everything crash down at once. She'd survived. She'd won. She'd exposed a conspiracy and destroyed a man who'd killed 3 wives. And in 4 days, she'd have to stand in front of the High Council and the entire court and prove she'd done it all for the right reasons. The bond pulsed. Kael was in the throne room, dealing with the immediate political fallout. She felt his stress, his exhaustion, his relief that she was safe within the palace walls. She sent back determination through the connection, a promise that she wasn't done fighting yet. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. The king's legal advisors interviewed Ara for hours, documenting every detail of her time at Lord Garrett's estate, every conversation, every threat, every piece of intelligence she'd shared and why. They asked the same questions 5 different ways, testing for inconsistencies, making sure her story would hold under hostile interrogation. She told them everything, even the parts that made her look bad, the information she'd sold about the king's son, the warnings she'd given that had endangered the original plan. Better to control the narrative than let Lord Garrett's council spring it as a surprise. Meanwhile, the palace buzzed with gossip. Half the court thought she was a hero, half thought she was a traitor who'd gotten lucky. The servants were split too, some defending her, some whispering that she'd slept her way into the king's good graces. Ara ignored all of it. She had one goal: destroy Lord Garrett so completely that he could never hurt anyone again. On the 3rd night, Kael found her in the library, surrounded by documents she'd been reviewing. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." "I'm the king. I don't sleep. I just close my eyes and worry in the dark." He sat across from her. "How are you holding up?" "Fine." "Ara." She looked up. "I'm terrified." "Better?" "Honest, at least." He reached across the table and she let him take her hand. The bond settled at the contact. "You don't have to do this alone. I can testify. So can my advisors. We have other witnesses." "I know, but I need to do this." She squeezed his hand. "For 6 years I watched and listened and stayed quiet. I saw terrible things and did nothing because I was powerless. Now I have power, my voice, my testimony, my truth. I need to use it, even if it costs you. Especially then." She met his eyes. "Because if I don't speak now, when will I? When it's safer? When it's easier? There's never a perfect time. There's just now and what you do with it." He studied her face. "You're going to change everything, aren't you?" "That's the plan." "Good." He stood, still holding her hand. "Come on, you need rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal." She let him pull her up and walk her back to her quarters. At her door, he hesitated. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "whatever they say about you, know that I believe you, I trust you, and I'm proud of what you've done." The bond sang with the truth of it. "Thank you," Ara said. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, brief, chaste, and more meaningful than anything else could have been, and left. Ara stood in the doorway for a long moment, touching the spot where he'd kissed her, feeling the bond hum with something that might have been hope. Then she went inside, lay down on her bed, and slept dreamlessly for the first time in weeks. The High Council chambers were packed. Every noble who could find an excuse to attend had crammed into the gallery. The servants who'd earned the right to observe stood along the back wall. The king's advisors sat in designated sections. Even common citizens had been allowed in. The trial was public by royal decree. Everyone wanted to see the Omega who'd brought down a conspiracy. Ara walked into that room wearing the same simple dress she'd worn when she'd first refused Lord Garrett. Her hair pulled back in a practical braid, no jewelry, no ornamentation. She looked exactly like what she was, a servant who'd decided to speak. The High Council sat at an elevated bench, 7 nobles chosen for their wisdom and supposed impartiality. Lord Garrett sat in the defendant's box, flanked by guards, looking composed despite the chains. His counsel was a sharp-eyed man named Severin, known for shredding witnesses in cross-examination. The chief counselor banged his gavel. This trial concerns charges of treason, conspiracy, and attempted rebellion against the crown. We will hear testimony from all relevant parties, beginning with the king's primary witness. His eyes found Ara. Miss Ara, please take the stand. She walked to the witness box and swore her oath to tell the truth. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. The prosecution went first, the king's legal counsel asking careful questions that let her lay out the timeline. Her infiltration of Lord Garrett's estate. The intelligence she'd shared. The moment she'd realized he knew she was a spy and her decision to warn him anyway. She spoke clearly, directly, without embellishment. Just the facts as she'd lived them. Then Severin stood for cross-examination and the real fight began. Miss Ara, he said with false courtesy, you claim you infiltrated Lord Garrett's estate as a spy for the crown. Is that correct? Yes. And yet you had no formal training as a spy, no education in intelligence gathering, no credentials whatsoever. He paused. In fact, you were a kitchen servant, isn't that right? Yes. So we're expected to believe that a kitchen servant, an Omega with no formal education, successfully deceived a man with 30 years of political experience. Does that seem credible to you? Ara met his eyes. It seems credible to me that powerful men consistently underestimate servants. You see us as furniture, background noise. We're there for everything, every private conversation, every unguarded moment, and you don't even notice. She smiled. That's not my failure. It's yours. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Severin's expression hardened. You also testified that you gave Lord Garrett intelligence about the king's illegitimate son, intelligence that could be used as a weapon against the crown. I did. And you expect us to believe this was part of your deception, that you willingly endangered a child to maintain your cover? Lord Garrett already knew about Matthias, Ara said. His spies had confirmed it months before I arrived. I verified information he already possessed. The only thing I endangered was his trust in his own intelligence network, because I made him wonder how much else I knew that his spies had missed. Convenient claim. Do you have proof? I have Lord Garrett's own documentation. His journal entries referencing Matthias dated 4 months before my arrival. The prosecution has submitted them as evidence. She turned to the counsel. He knew. I just made him think I was telling him something new. Severin shifted tactics. You warned Lord Garrett about the king's planned arrest. You told him to accelerate his timeline, to move against the crown before he was ready. That warning caused royal troops to be mobilized, caused a battle that killed 17 men. Are you responsible for those deaths? The question hit like a blade. Ara took a breath. Yes. Shocked silence. I am responsible, she continued. My warning caused Lord Garrett to move too quickly. That led to the battle at his estate. Men died because of choices I made. She looked directly at the gallery. But those deaths happened because Lord Garrett chose treason, chose to build a private army, chose to plot against the crown. I didn't make those choices for him. I just forced him to make them before he was ready, which is the only reason we won instead of facing a prolonged civil war that would have killed thousands. So you admit you manipulated events for a preferred outcome. I admit I made hard choices in impossible circumstances. I admit I'm not perfect and people died because of decisions I made. Her voice strengthened. But I don't apologize for stopping a conspiracy that would have torn this kingdom apart. I did what needed to be done with the tools I had available. Severin paced. Let's talk about those tools, specifically the mate bond between you and the king. Every person in the room leaned forward. The bond formed publicly and was immediately rejected, Severin said. Yet you claim it influenced your actions, that the king could feel your emotions, that you used this connection to communicate. Isn't it possible that this entire story is a fabrication? That you and the king coordinated testimony using the bond, and that Lord Garrett is innocent of the charges? If the bond let us coordinate perfectly, Lord Garrett would already be dead, Ara said bluntly. The king would have known exactly when to attack, exactly where I was, exactly what intelligence I'd given. Instead, he had to trust me. Blind, terrified trust based on nothing but a connection that we both tried to reject and couldn't. She looked at Kael, sitting in the observer section. The bond didn't make this easier. It made it harder. Because I felt his fear for me, his anger at my choices, his absolute certainty that I was going to get myself killed. And I had to keep going anyway. The bond pulsed between them, visible to anyone who knew what to look for. The bond proves nothing except that fate has a cruel sense of humor, Ara continued. It doesn't coordinate. It doesn't communicate clearly. It just makes you feel what the other person feels and hope you're interpreting it correctly. We didn't use it as a tool. We survived despite it. Severin spent another hour trying to break her testimony, questioning her memory, her motives, her credibility. But Ara had spent 6 years listening to nobles interrogate servants. She knew every trap, every trick, every way they tried to make you doubt yourself. She didn't break. Finally, frustrated, Severin turned to his client. Lord Garrett wishes to address the council directly. Lord Garrett stood, chains rattling. This entire proceeding is a farce. That woman, he pointed at Ara, is a liar and a manipulator who seduced her way into positions she had no business holding. She's an omega playing at politics, and the only reason anyone believes her is because she spread her legs for the right person. The bond flared with Kael's rage. Ara felt him start to stand, felt his intention to defend her honor, and sent back calm through the connection. Let me handle this. She turned to face Lord Garrett directly. I'm an omega who listened, she said, who watched, who remembered every conversation you had in front of servants you treated as furniture, every threat you made, every woman you destroyed, every person you killed or disappeared when they became inconvenient. She stepped forward. You think my testimony is lies? Fine. Let me name witnesses. The stable hand who heard you order your third wife's execution. The merchant you paid to transport weapons in false-bottom wagons. The guard captain who helped you move bodies. She rattled off 15 names. People Lord Garrett had thought were loyal or too frightened to speak. People who'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to give them permission to tell the truth. I didn't seduce anyone, Bati, Ara said. I did something far more dangerous. I paid attention, and now you're going to face the consequences of every person you underestimated. Lord Garrett's composure cracked. You're nothing, a servant playing dress-up. When this is over, you'll go back to scrubbing floors where you belong. Maybe I will, Ara said, but you'll be dead or in a cell. I'll take that trade. The chief counselor banged his gavel. Order. Lord Garrett, you will refrain from addressing the witness directly. He turned to Ara. Do you have anything else to add to your testimony? She did. For 6 years I was invisible, Ara said, addressing the entire chamber. I scrubbed floors and served meals and cleaned up after people who looked through me like I didn't exist. I watched terrible things happen and stayed silent because I had no power, no voice, no way to stop it. She looked at the gallery where servants stood along the back wall. But we were there for everything, every corrupt deal, every whispered conspiracy, every moment when power was abused and nobody else was watching. Assis. She turned back to the council. Lord Garrett isn't on trial alone. The system that let him operate for years is on trial. The assumption that servants don't matter, that omegas don't have value, that people at the bottom don't deserve to be heard, that's on trial. Her voice rose. I'm testifying today not just against one man, but against every structure that said I should stay quiet and accept my place. Well, I didn't, and I won't, and neither will the dozens of other people who've been watching and listening and waiting for someone to care about their truth. Silence filled the chamber. Then, from the back wall, One of the servants started clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, every servant in the room was applauding, a sound like thunder that made the nobles shift uncomfortably. The chief counselor banged his gavel. "Order! This is a court of law, not a theater." But the applause continued for another minute before finally dying down. Ara stepped down from the witness box and returned to her seat. The bond thrummed with Kael's pride, but she didn't look at him, just sat with her hands folded and waited for the rest of the trial to unfold. Over the next 2 days, witness after witness confirmed Ara's testimony. Servants who'd overheard conversations, guards who'd followed illegal orders, merchants who'd been coerced into conspiracy. The evidence piled up until even Severin stopped trying to argue innocence and focused on mitigating circumstances. On the third day, the High Council deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. "Lord Garrett," the chief counselor announced, "you are found guilty of treason, conspiracy, attempted rebellion, and the murders of 3 women. You are sentenced to death by execution, to be carried out 1 week from today. Your titles, lands, and assets are forfeit to the crown." Lord Garrett didn't flinch, just smiled that same cold smile he'd worn in his study. "You think you've won," he said, looking directly at Ara. "But you're still just a servant, still nothing. And when the novelty wears off, when the king gets tired of his pet project, you'll be right back where you started, invisible." "Maybe," Ara said, "but you'll still be dead. I'll take that trade." The guards dragged him away, still smiling, still certain he'd gotten the last word. But he hadn't. The palace erupted in celebration that night. The conspiracy was crushed, the traitors exposed, justice served. Ara avoided the main festivities. Instead, she found herself in the kitchens where she'd worked for 6 years, sharing bread and wine with the servants who'd known her before any of this started. "You did it," the scarred cook said, raising her cup. "Actually did it. Brought down a lord." "We did it," Ara corrected. "Every person who testified, every witness who came forward, we did it together." "Still, you started it." The woman smiled. "You spoke when the rest of us were too scared. That matters." They drank until the wine was gone, and the stories got louder. Stories about nobles who'd been put in their place, about servants who'd stood up and won, about the day an Omega refused a political marriage and changed everything. Ara let herself be part of it, not the hero, just one of them. A servant who'd gotten lucky and refused to waste it. Around midnight, she slipped away and found Kael waiting in the garden where they'd first talked after her attack. "Hiding from your own celebration?" she asked. "Needed air and quiet." He looked at her. "You were amazing today. The testimony, the way you handled Severin, the speech about visibility." He shook his head. "You changed the conversation, made it about more than just Lord Garrett." "Good. It should be about more." She sat on the garden bench. "One trial doesn't fix the system, doesn't change how servants are treated or how Omegas are valued, but it's a start." "What's next for you?" Kael asked. "I don't know. I'm officially your advisor again, right? So I guess I go back to morning briefings and pretending I know what I'm doing." "You know exactly what you're doing, and I want you to do more of it." He sat beside her. "I want you to reform how servants are treated in the palace. Give them actual protections. Create systems for reporting abuse. Make sure what happened to you, and to everyone else who had to stay silent, doesn't happen again." Ara stared at him. "That's a massive undertaking. It'll piss off half the noble houses." "Good. They could use some discomfort." He took her hand. "You said you wanted to matter, to have a voice. This is me giving you the authority to use it. Change the system from inside. Make the palace, make the kingdom better." The bond hummed with possibility. "That's going to take years," Ara said. "I have years. And I'll make enemies." "You already have enemies. Might as well earn them properly." She laughed. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." He squeezed her hand. "You survived hell, brought down a conspiracy, testified in front of the entire court, and changed how people think about power. If anyone can reform this system, it's you." Ara looked at their joined hands, feeling the bond pulse between them, felt the weight of everything that had happened and everything that could happen next. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it. But I want it in writing, official authority, real power to make changes." "Done." And I want to work with the servants directly, not through noble intermediaries who will water everything down. Done. And you have to back me up when the nobles complain, because they will complain, loudly. I'll look forward to it. He turned to face her. Anything else? She met his eyes, gray and steady, and full of something that looked like forever. About the bond, she said. Yes? I'm not ready to accept it yet. Not fully. You hurt me when you rejected it, and that doesn't just go away because we survived something together. I know. But she took a breath. I'm willing to see where this goes. See if you meant what you said about earning it. See if we can build something real instead of just accepting what fate decided. The bond sang. I'll take it, Kael said, and I'll prove I meant every word. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. The kiss was soft, tentative, and absolutely nothing like the bond insisted it should be. No claiming, no marking, no biological imperative. Just two people choosing each other despite everything. When they pulled apart, Ara was smiling. That's a start, she said. Just a start? You rejected me in front of your entire court. You're going to have to do a lot better than one garden kiss. He laughed. Challenge accepted. They sat there as the celebration wound down and the palace settled into sleep. Two people bound by a bond they hadn't chosen but were learning to want. Two people who'd survived conspiracy, betrayal, and their own stubborn refusal to give up. What do you think happens now? Ara asked quietly. Now we rebuild. Fix what's broken. Make things better than they were. Kael looked at her. And you stop being invisible, forever. Promise? Promise. She leaned against him, feeling the bond settle into something that felt like peace. Not perfect. Nothing about them was perfect. But real. Honest. Built on choice instead of fate. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky. The palace slept. And somewhere in the dungeons, Lord Garrett waited for an execution that would prove that power had limits and servants had voices, and underestimating the people you stepped on was the fastest way to fall. The execution happened 1 week later, public and witnessed by thousands. Ara didn't attend. She'd seen enough death. Instead, she spent the day in meetings with servant representatives, starting the long work of reforming the system from inside. But she felt it through the bond when Lord Garrett died, felt Kael's grim satisfaction that justice had been served, felt the weight lift from both their shoulders. It was over. The conspiracy crushed, the traitor dead, the kingdom safe. And Ara, the servant, the Omega, the girl who'd been told she was nothing, stood in a strategy room with a dozen servant leaders and began the work of changing everything. She'd started this journey expecting to die. Instead, she'd learned to live, to fight, to speak, to matter. And she was never going silent again. Months later, when the first servant protections were officially codified into law, when the palace began treating its staff as people instead of furniture, when Omega started speaking up because one had shown them it was possible, that's when Ara finally accepted the bond. Not because Kael demanded it, not because fate insisted, but because he'd proven himself worthy of it, had stood beside her through every reform, every fight, every moment when the nobles pushed back and she pushed harder. The acceptance ceremony was private, just them and a handful of witnesses, no grand spectacle, no political theater, just two people who'd chosen each other, finally admitting what the bond had known all along. When Kael marked her, when she marked him back, the bond settled into something permanent and unbreakable. They stood there afterward, bound in every way that mattered, and Ara felt complete for the first time in her life. So, Kael said, how does it feel to be the Alpha King's mate? Ask me again when you stop snoring, Ara said. He laughed. I don't snore. You absolutely snore. The bond doesn't lie. The bond is supposed to make us more connected, not give you ammunition. The bond makes us equals, which means I get to mock you for snoring, she smiled. Get used to it. I already am. They walked through the palace hand in hand, past servants who smiled and nobles who'd learned to respect her and guards who nodded in acknowledgement. Ara, who'd been nothing, who'd been invisible, who'd been told to stay quiet and accept her place, walked as an equal to the king she'd refused, the mate she'd earned, the partner she'd chosen. She'd been meant to be erased. Instead, she became the reckoning, and the kingdom would never be the same.